What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had Madara and the Kyuubi sealed inside of him, or what if Naruto was a low born in Westeros and became king, go check out my main channel. And if you're interested in what if Naruto was taken over by the Kyuubi when he was born, or what if Naruto was trained by Itachi after leaving Jiraiya, go check out my second channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Life for those throughout Sunspear and by proxy the Martell family was exclusively sunshine and rainbows ever since Elia and Rhaenys were returned to their loving kin. The days since then were consumed with laughter and the nights occupied by parties that ran citywide for pretty much an entire month. Sunspear and its neighboring cities were in a constant state of euphoric celebration. Perhaps no one was more so taken by this vibe than Oberyn, who used this opportunity to indulge in the more primal aspects of what was an already liberated personality. Normally it was Doran that kept a leash on his brother, so to speak, but even the stoic lord of Sunspear cut loose during this month, drinking a bit and laughing even more than that. Their mannerisms often left their sister worn out, but she was happy all the same. A state of being she forgot she could reach. Rhaenys discovered another person that she could interact with, one that was not her mother or Naruto. This person came in the form of Princess Arianne Nimrose Martell, or simply Arianne. There was a minor age gap of 2 years between the two princesses, but it may as well have been 2 days with how well Rhaenys and Arianne got along. The two young girls quickly crafted a bond that essentially made them sisters. Though she was under the watchful eyes of Elia for the first week or so, Ashera proved the worry over her previous actions to be unfounded. When she quickly fell into the swing of things, Sunspear was so distinct from anywhere else in Westeros that once it was inside of a person it was difficult to forget. There were still moments of sadness over what she lost, but no longer did she allow that to dictate her future. Part of her recovery included Ashara's favorite antic that came with this new life. This pertained to their trip to the water gardens, and how she was able to pile on abundant amounts of teasing on her favorite blonde. Speaking of the blonde, his assimilation into the group of Dornish went much smoother than he could have ever predicted. Initially he hung around solely because Elia was paying him generously and he gave his word, but the longer that he remained in Sunspear the more comfortable he became. Elia was a constant friend to him during this time, having meals with him and even watching him train from time to time. Of course there was Rhaenys, who was always pleased to see him, and that extended to Arianne, who often joined. And then there was Ashera. That was a relationship more elaborate than the others, but it was still one. He was happy to have Doran and he were on passable terms, and perhaps the most surprising turn of events was the friendship that Naruto had developed with Oberyn. After the dust had settled from their fight, there were cuts, blood and bruises, but these marks fostered an incredible friendship between the two warriors. Naruto didn't know how to describe his situation, not completely at least. It was foreign, it was novel, it was something that he was happy to be a part of. However, all good things do come to an end, and that end came when the outside world knocked on Doran's door. That knocking is precisely what Elia, Oberyn and Doran were discussing. We knew this was coming eventually. Perhaps we should have come up with a plan instead of parties. Doran surmised a fleeting look of regret settling upon the wrinkles that were deeply baked into his pasty skin. Oberyn's arms were locked tightly to his chest and his left foot was rapping off the ground in annoyance. How can we be sure that this isn't some sort of trap to finish what they tried to do to Elia? It was painstakingly clear how profoundly against the proposal he was. Not someone to sit back and play the quiet damsel when it was her future being discussed. Elia piped up with a frown placed on her face. We don't know anything. It could be a genuine attempt or it could be a trap. Glancing down on the missive in his hand, Doran inspected the paper. Without reading its words, he had read them enough, as it was the letter is signed and sealed by Jon Arryn. His repute alone gives the request credibility. His honor has been unquestionable ever since he took over as Lord of the Eyrie. Yes, I know the stories about the hand, but we can't hinge the life of our sister on the hopes that one man is true to his reputation. Maybe he could have been convinced to trust the current king if he didn't have ties to the Lannisters, but Robert's queen was through and through a lion that could never be trusted. Temples tightly furrowed in thought, Elia was busy studying the floor to help concentrate her thoughts, which were a bit erratic at the moment. What does the request say again? Doran took a breath before he recited what the ink on the page said. The king requests that Elia Martell, former wife of Rhaegar Targaryen, comes to King's Landing during the tourney of the king in 3 weeks to come to terms about matters regarding the Iron Throne. Lady Martell will be allowed to bring her own guard and will be treated with guests' rights. Should this request be denied, then it will be viewed as Doran's declaration of war against the other realms of Westeros. They have us backed into a corner. We can't have another war so soon, let alone one against the other realms, Elia pointed out with a small speck of worry in her voice, while the rest of her started to come to terms with what she needed to do. Clenching the paper in his hand tighter, Doran forced a calming breath through his lungs. He did so loathe being pushed around by one of his rivals, even if that rival was the king himself. At the very least we have proof that they offered guest rights. At his wit's end with the idea of entertaining this bogus request, Oberyn fell into a loud angry shout. To all the hells with them and their damned guest rights. Have you forgotten that they killed our kin, a child no less? Their word is worth less than the sand of Sunspear. His passionate call to action was met with silence. Elia flinched at the mention of Aegon, while Doran glared at Oberyn with none of the passion found in the young viper's eyes. This isn't the time to be thinking with your spear, Oberyn. Robert Baratheon may be the king, but he can't kill guests with impunity. If he does, then he will be seen as another mad king, and he will lose the Iron Throne. This is the best time for us to act. Oberyn would have protested till the red in his face went blue, if not for Elia laying a hand on his shoulder and shaking her head. No, the young man, not even 29 days old, looked at his sister in disbelief, but the certainty in her copper-colored eyes smothered any words his angered lingua could lash out with. Smiling at her younger brother and even supplying him with a hug, she turned towards Doran, who was stepping away from the chair with the golden spear. We are all of the same mind, Doran. Now we just need to prepare, though we don't have much time. I can't leave Sunspear right now, but rest assured that I will have Aerys set up the most capable guard Sunspear has to protect you. Actually, he'd hold that conference with the head of the guard as soon as this meeting was done, and I will be part of this guard. We left you alone in that awful place once before, and I won't make that mistake a second time. Oberyn made that promise while also holding Elia's hand and squeezing it carefully. When she looked at Doran and Oberyn, an unequivocally delighted smile lit up Elia's beautiful face. She didn't tear up from the show of support, but she came awfully close. Thank you for all of your help. It's nice to have my family back. I also have my own requests to make. Not expecting her to say that, Doran's graying eyebrows rose up against his forehead. Of course, what do you need? First, Rhaenys needs to remain here. I will have Ashera watch over her while I'm gone. My daughter will not go anywhere near that evil place. The fire burning in her brown eyes could have melted even the Iron Throne. Both brothers bobbed their heads in immediate approval to the first request. Naturally, they wanted their niece as safe as she could be. Consider it done. Doran made sure that he verbally committed to Elia's appeal. And second, I want Naruto to be part of my personal guard. I know Oberyn will be there, but I won't go unless Naruto is also at my side. She was anxious about returning to the landing, but the idea of Naruto being there put an ease on some of those worries. That will be up to him. Naruto is not under our banner, and as such not under my command, but from what I've seen of him, I believe he will agree. A smile warmed Elia's lips, happy that Doran wasn't against the inclusion of Naruto. There was no bringing up his potential danger or loyalty, and that was what made her happy. It was an indication that her month's work of including Naruto in their lives was working. That will be all very good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to speak with Aerys about the preparations. Giving both of his siblings a nod, the current Lord of Sunspear left the room. Oberyn saw no reason to hang around a stuffy room like this any longer. He directed himself at Elia with a grin. Come on, sister, let's go find my nieces. Knowing who they're with, they could be anywhere in Sunspear. Elia laughed, but knew his words to be true. Yes, let's. Somewhere in Sunspear, lurking on the teeth like partitions on the first winding wall, was the blonde assassin Naruto. His cerulean orbs were lingering on the horizon, while a pair of small laughs sung on both sides of his body. He balanced himself on one leg with his arms spread out at his sides like one of those scarecrows that many a farmer in Westeros used to keep away pesky avians. This was just one of his many training exercises. This one in particular was one he used to help practice balance and patience. He did have an enhancement to his training this time around. It came in the form of two young girls literally sitting on his outstretched arms. Rhaenys found herself on his right arm while Arianne was relaxed on his left. The weight of each girl should have made his arms bow to some degree, but the assassin's limbs remained perfectly straight, unbent. Their position was precarious, but in spite of that there wasn't a single thought among the three that any of them might take that tumble off the tall wall. She never got the chance to do something risky like this, so Arianne was basking in the opportunity afforded to her by Rhaenys and Naruto. Thanks to being the daughter of Doran Martell, she found it troublesome to have fun in Sunspear, because more often than not people were too fearful of angering her father, but not Naruto. He had no such qualms. I didn't know Naruto was strong and fast. The youngest of the group brought her hands to her mouth and giggled into them, as her legs continued to swing back and forth in the gentle breeze that licked against her. Yup, Naruto's the best, he can do anything, she proclaimed with no shortage of sureness in her exclamations, chuckling at the totally innocent conversation spanning his shoulders. Naruto was careful to ensure that his merriment didn't jostle his body in a way that disturbed their balance on his arms. If you keep talking me up like that, Ray, my ego is going to burst. Elia's daughter blinked a number of times, as her face curled up in confusion. What's ego? She posed the question to her friend, and cousin Ariane slid a thumb along one of her eyebrows and pushed out her lips and thought, I think that means you're making him feel happy. The princess of 7 years made her guess, but even she sounded uncertain. The blonde grinned at the attempt to decipher the word, but decided against correcting Ariane's slight error in identifying the word's meaning. Oh really, why didn't you just say so? That was the final nail drilled into his coffin, and it broke. The blonde who outright laughed, a sound that billowed freely from his upturned lips. An assassin he may be, but there wasn't much he enjoyed more than seeing the brightness in young souls like Rainey's. I don't know, Ray, sorry. And how about you, Ariane? It's been a few days. Two dark eyes in the chubby girl's face shone through like the sun as an ideal smile ran full over her face. I've been spending time with my baby brother. I tried to get him to say my name, but the most he can manage is Ari. Don't worry, Quentin is only 2. I'm sure he'll be saying your name soon enough, Naruto reassured Ariane with a smile, almost able to feel the disappointment becoming palpable as the girl on his left arm pouted despondently. Yeah, Ariane, I know that you'll be an awesome big sister. Rainey's hopped into the boat with Naruto, her broad smile fueling the fledgling confidence that started to multiply in the oldest child of Doran Martell before pleasantries could be exchanged any further. Naruto's eyes subtly glanced to look behind him. All right, girls, it's time to get down. And to show that they had no choice, he took a step backward, which put the 3 of them on a more sure-footed ground. All while Rainey's mouth with a whine that sparkled deep in her brown eyes. It was a question shared by Ariane, who also looked to the tall blonde for an answer. Because your mom is right around the corner, Rainey's. And what did I tell you too? When it comes to your parents, to never tell them about the things that we do. The 2 answered him in unison, which made Naruto smile proudly, who knew he'd be building habits of disobedience in the next generation of Dornish nobility. Exactly. Now put your chin up. Elia and Oberyn are on their way up. His words proved to be prophetic when not 20 seconds later the trio were joined by Elia and Oberyn. The latter of the pair wasn't able to keep his tongue stilled in his mouth. Okay, this is weird, he said in reference to the way that all 3 of them were staring at them from the moment they arrived. Elia shrugged off his comment, more than used to the strange things that happened when Naruto was involved. Walking up to Naruto till they were chest to chest, she stood on her toes so that she could whisper into his ear and hide what she needed to say. Rainey's watched this and thought that the contact meant something else. That something made her smile with such brightness that it'd make a diamond look like coal. I have to go back to King's Landing Road outside of Sunspear. Are you sure that you won't take a carriage? Dorian's hopes only seemed even more far-fetched when Oberyn from his horse beside Elia laughed openly at the request. Elia was not in some wooden box but on a horse like everyone else in the party. She tightened the loop her arms had around Naruto's stomach as she looked upon her older brother from over the blonde's shoulder. I will be on horseback like everyone else. I am not some doll to be locked away. Brother, you are no such thing, Elia. I only want to make sure that you are comfortable. His tone and the look in his eyes took a much stiffer variant when the wise man alternated his focus to the whiskered person who sat in front of his sister. If anything happens to her, then it's on your head. Assassin, far from concerned with the threat thrown his way, Naruto merely smirked at Doran. In return, they may have come to an understanding of sorts, but their relationship had some ground to travel before they'd be calling each other friend. The eldest prince's facial muscles flocked into a frown when Naruto didn't deem it necessary to issue a verbal response, but he knew silence was the best he'd get from Naruto. It annoyed him to no end how defiant the blonde was, but he had the favor of both of Doran's siblings, so there was little he could do that didn't risk fracturing his family. I won't hold you back any longer. Maneuvering his horse to face the rest of the men who'd come with them to King's Landing, the Red Viper pulled back on the leathers and forced his horse into a gallop that took him to the front of their sizable group. Ready yourself, my friends, you're going to have a heavy stallion bucking between your thighs all day long. I hope you can take this ride. Let's go. A stampede of hooves on the sandy terrain was paired with the laughter of the men on those horses as the journey to the king's tourney began. With the Red Viper at the point of the formation they discussed, the grouping began to form up. As the mounts sped onward, their design was a simple one. They were in a diamond formation with Elia placed in the distinct center of their cluster alongside the ever-dangerous assassin who loomed as the last line of defense should the unlikely need that he was required ever arise. Other than the wind, there wasn't much around that disrupted the professional air around the group that was racing through the seemingly endless desert that surrounded their every pace. The expedition was a handful of hours old when Naruto finally ended the code of Silence on his and Elia's shared ride. Are you ready for what's coming? Elia had no need for an explanation to know what her horse mate was asking of her. I don't think that I'll know for sure until I'm in the situation, she confessed into the back of Naruto's shoulders, worry and warmth warming together in her words. Gazing down on the chestnut-colored steed that thundered on one stride at a time, Naruto nodded his head while the rest of him jolted and rocked in tandem with the momentum of the muscular creature. I'll be right there with you. Confidence. Elia thought that word perfectly embodied Naruto, even more so than the word assassin. It didn't seem to matter who he was facing. It could be a man with political clout or a world-famous warrior. Naruto looked them in the eye and continued to be himself, and that man was here with her. Naruto's keen blues followed the small particles of sand being displaced by the hooves in front of them before he offered a suggestion. We're still 4 hours out from Vaith. You should try to get some rest. We may have hoods on, but the sun is still very much a problem. I think you might be right. The remaining 4 hours weren't notably fast, but neither were they particularly slow, and when they made land in Vaith it was nearing 6 in the evening and the fall sun was on its way down for the day. The Lord of House Vaith was kind enough or smart enough to provide the group an entire inn for housing. Cleared out the inn became an easy reason for the men to take a break and have a party with plenty of drinks. The duty to remember moderation fell to each man. Naruto was not one of those men because he wasn't partaking in the party. Tucked away in his room, the dealer of death was sitting upon his desk shirtless and in a meditative position. At this time of night in the desert biome, most of Dorne's people would have 2 layers of clothing on because these nights were cold. Only second to the far north. Naruto, however, welcomed the chill that wrapped around his body like a lover using the cold to test his concentration. Naruto's stationary person remained in perfect synchronization as he breathed in and then breathed out. His mind was emptied of any previous thoughts, and in place was a barren void that further helped Naruto detach himself from his physical body. He was about to reach the peak of what meditation could provide when the door to his room opened. Naruto cracked open one of his blue eyes to find it was Elia who opened the seal that kept his little slice of the inn isolated from the jubilation outside. Totally forgetful that he was naked from the waist up, he sent a smile Elia's way. How are you enjoying House Vaith's hospitality? What plan she had in mind was thrown into total disarray thanks to how Elia found Naruto. Forget him being on the desk. The granted view of his bare chest and abdomen doing unfair things in tandem with his breathing neatly tied up her tongue. Her brain immediately made the decision that up close was much better than viewing it from afar. Yes, they were very kind to give us as much as they did. Her modest response elicited a chortle from the blonde, who had a very different interpretation of what House Vaith's gesture meant. I think it would have been an insult you and Oberyn had they offered any less. Those slimy nobles couldn't imagine offending someone who can do something for them. Anyone who spent enough time around the blonde of a single name knew how he felt about the ruling class, and she was no exception. You don't mind if I sit on your bed, do you? She probed, her eyes doing the admirable work of staying glued to his face and no lower. But the temptation. Naruto brushed his arm towards the mattress. By all means, someone should get some use out of that thing. Elia pretended that his words didn't bother her as she shuffled over to sit on the foot of Naruto's bed. She smoothed out the fabric that laid over her thighs, then she looked at the blonde and his unconventional seat. I wanted to talk to you about something. Naruto quickly picked up on the signs in her voice that told him Elia was being extremely serious right now. Nodding his head, he gave her every ounce of his attention. I'm all ears. What is it that you wanted to chat about? The mountain. The mere mention of that vile monster was enough to make the assassin's skin bristle with thick animosity. Naruto's warm eyes cooled down a number of notches, and Elia was glad that his deadly glare wasn't meant for her. What about him? Frowning heavily, her gesture was dripping with contempt, just like Naruto's. I believe that he'll be taking part in the tourney's events. He had a feeling for where this conversation was going, but Naruto wanted to hear the words come from Elia's mouth. A lot of men travel from their homes to win gold and fame in these types of events, he remarked, trying to sound neutral about such things, and I couldn't give 2 shits about those men. She shouted through his calm claim that famous Dornish temper coming to a blistering head. Naruto remained unmoved by the anger being thrown at him, which was very much like the first time he met Elia. Martell sitting there as still as a statue of stone, his blue eyes drilled into Elia's bubbling anger. He remained this way for a long moment before his tempered words were deployed. What do you want from me? Elia, channeling the dark justified section of herself. Elia's lips parted far enough to show off a fearless scowl that excellently depicted the emotions that forced her blood into a boil. I want you to kill him. The request was a simple one, but at the same time a complex request. To kill Greater Clegane, to break the mountain. Elia stormed to her feet and stomped over to where Naruto was still sitting. His position of choice left him much higher up than she was, but no height difference could dampen the intensity lurking in her eyes. I can't wait any longer. I trusted your word, but I need this. I want You to promise me that you'll do your best to kill him. Promise me again." He shut his eyes and dragged in a breath of fresh air that was further stretched out as it trickled through his defined body, a body that was also his most deadly weapon. "I promise that I will do my best to kill the mountain." During the king's tourney he made the vow that bound him to a path that was thrust upon him by a wronged mother, by a woman who was nearly taken against her will and killed, not thinking, only reacting from the heart. The princess took Naruto by the wrists and pulled him off the desk and onto his feet. Now that their height was a bit more manageable, she wrapped him up in an embrace, uncaring that he was only half dressed. That was a thought so far from her mind. Right away the warmth rolling off his body pressed through her clothing and made her sigh, or was it the relief of having Naruto's promise that brought forth her sigh? Naruto moved to duplicate her friendly gesture with his eyes still closed, until he felt something against his forehead. When he opened his eyes he almost jerked back when he found the soft expressive eyes of Elia Martell waiting for him. It felt like those eyes were prying him apart one layer at a time in the most alluring of ways. Their foreheads were resting on each other, her arms were draped tenderly around his neck, but there wasn't anything to convince Naruto that he should look away from those eyes that held his gaze. "Elia?" His quiet question of surprise sparked Elia to once again engage in the conversation that she started. "I know that I made you promise me, but you better not die. If you do die, then I will never forgive you." Was it morbid for her to say yes? But it was also the only way that she could think of to express herself with words, at least judging by the way that Naruto's blue eyes mellowed down into something softer. It seemed that the blonde understood every bit of the message, that Elia was trying to convey emotion, and all he would have nodded his head, if not for how it was pressed to hers. "When you put it that way, how can I possibly refuse you?" A gentle giggle sprawled free of the princess, her warm breath splashed ever so subtly against Naruto's mouth as a consequence of their closeness. "Why do you think I said it?" They weren't words that were randomly put together. Unable to help the grin forming, the assassin stared at the southern woman with an impressed shine in his eyes. Who would have thought that the gentle lady in his arms would be the one doing the manipulating? "You clever little snake. I may not be strong, but one doesn't need powerful muscles to be dangerous, and no doubt your viper's tongue is as sharp as any sword." The back and forth left them in fits of laughter. The looming shadow of Gregor Clegane forgotten for the night. King's Landing Crownlands. John Aaron was a man respected for his honor and political acumen, but it would be wrong to say that he was the picture of physical health. He had the general frame of a man in his prime, but the stress of a difficult life had turned the middle-aged man's hair a dusty gray, and when his lips moved the spaces in his mouth showed missing teeth to go with blue eyes and sprinkled in remnants of blonde, his original hair color. In quiet moments like these John Aaron lamented that he stepped out of the veil and got involved in the titanic mess that was politics around the Iron Throne in King's Landing, and the mess was barely 2 months old then. He remembered why he did the things he did. The short answer was Robert Baratheon, his one-time ward and now king of the Seven Kingdoms, a man that he was happy to see as the son that he always wanted. A feeling of commotion in front of him forced the new hand to look up and find that the entourage from the south had arrived. Elia Oberyn and Naruto dismounted from their respective horses. He put on a genuine smile and did the task assigned to him. "Greetings, Prince Oberyn, Lady Elia. I welcome you to King's Landing." Oberyn was the first of the group to step forward. "Thank you for coming out to meet us. My brother Prince Dorian sends his apologies with me, seeing as how he was unable to attend." This was total lip service, but at the very least it was a polite way to open things between their two sides. A shame, but these are busy days for us all. Perhaps next time Lord Dorian will be able to make the climb from the south. John went to greet Elia, but when he stepped forward Naruto moved, so that he was in between the hand and Elia. Thankfully the learned man understood the message and stopped where he was. "I hope your journey here wasn't too strenuous, Lady Elia." Elia subtly put her hand on Naruto's back as her eyes slowly zoned in on the older Aaron instead of staying on the city like they were. "It was quite uneventful. Thank you for asking, John. Hope that putting any worries out beforehand would make their upcoming talks easier on all parties." "Don't worry, my lady. I have put every precaution possible into making sure that your stay in King's Landing is as safe and as comfortable as possible." With Naruto acting as a buffer, she responded quite frankly, "I don't think there will come a day where I'll ever be comfortable in this city, Lord Hand." Although he was disappointed by the response he got, the protector of the veil moved on to the blonde who had yet to take his cerulean eyes off of him. "And who are you?" John toned himself down to make certain his question came off as being polite. Here Oberyn chose to introduce his friend in the blonde's place. Throwing an arm over Naruto's shoulders he fired off a roguish grin at the political official in front of them. "Why, this is the man that stopped the mountain cold. This is Naruto, a man here to make sure that my dear sister is safe at all times." Anytime he was able to brag about the shared defeat of the mountain and the Lannisters, then he would, and in doing so this time he could put a wrench in any plans that the crown might or might not have. It was only there for a moment, but stiffness Grasped John Aaron. He was forced to look upon Naruto differently, weariness poorly veiled and an expression rife with shock. Once composure returned to him, so did his voice. I see, it's a pleasure to meet you, sir. Naruto's facial expression remained as flat as the ground beneath his feet. I'm as much of a sir as any of the people living in your city's crappy flea bottom. Hidden underneath the cutting cold in his tone was a sense of sadness, for the poorest denizens of the Crownlands. To his credit, John's face fell as he was reminded of the oppressive lives that so many in King's Landing had to try and survive. Yes, I have seen the depths that the Targaryens have bled the poor. It's my hope that with more time in my station I'll be able to help those in Flea Bottom. They may have shared the same goal, but Naruto held no trust that the new Lord Hand could achieve their shared vision. Hopes die with men and women. It is an action that lasts. Maybe we can debate ideologies later. I'm afraid that we need to report to the king. My squire will show your men to their housing for your stay, but we must go. The closer we are to the tourney, the more impatient the king becomes. John admitted with the faintest sighs of frustration. Oberyn nodded his head and even found a reason to grin. Very well, and who knows, maybe we might be allowed to partake in the festivities. Red Keep throne room. If anyone would have told me that I'd see that chair of swords 2 times in my life, then I'd call them insane. These were the kind of thoughts that the assassin who had stopped King's Landing from exploding into flames thought as he walked into the throne room. Naruto's inspection of the room, something that he did every time that he entered a new space, brought into one of the few people he met when he was last here. Jaime Lannister was looking at him with confusion in his narrowed green eyes, figuring he could have some fun. The killer sent a smirk the way of the 2-time Kingsguard. His response only served to make the conflicted expression on Jaime's face deepen, much to the assassin's amusement. Oh, he'll have some questions for me later. He floated his eyes over John Aaron, where he eventually found the man on the Iron Throne, Robert Baratheon, the demon of the Trident. Naruto named the new king in his head while he may have been sitting. It was clear that Robert was even taller than him, which had to put him well over 6 feet in height. Dense dark hair and bright blue eyes were prominent on the man, who had plenty of muscles which helped him swing that massive war hammer. No doubt not to be forgotten was his queen, a beautiful woman with striking golden hair and emerald eyes that held a low level of intensity. Even in silence her figure was slender. She wore red and gold dress that was tight to her figure. My king, Lady Queen. Oberyn's legs stretched off to the side as he bowed. Elia dipped her head respectively and turned. The only person to remain upright was the assassin, who had his eyes on the circle of lions around the room's walls. Either Robert did not care enough about Naruto, or he didn't see the blonde, because his focus was on the more famous male in the trio, the young Red Viper. I have been hearing plenty of your exploits lately. It's a shame that I did not get to face you in battle during the war. You should be glad that you didn't fight me, my lord. If we had crossed paths, then you would have never made it to that throne. His flamboyant youthful response sucked the air right out of the room, and the room was given life again when the king unleashed a wave of deep laughter that originated from the gut. Haha, now that's the response of a warrior. It's nice to finally find someone with some spine around here, ain't that right, Kingslayer? Robert mocked one of his 2 most skilled guardsmen. Clearly Robert still held on to resentment over Jaime stealing the pleasure of killing Aerys 2 from him. Another of Robert's knights, Sir Barristan Selmy, kept an eye on Jaime. The Lannister knight looked visibly frustrated, but he refrained from barking back, much to the older Kingsguard's relief. While this played out, Queen Cersei's sharp eyes lingered in Naruto's direction. She stared down the blonde, who had the same mane of hair that many of the Lannisters did, but the difference was as clear as the blue eyes he put on her. Seeing him head on sparked something inside of her, because it made Cersei remember you're the one who defeated Ser Gregor. Sadly for Naruto, whenever the queen spoke, people listened, which is why every set of eyes in the room came crashing down on him. It didn't matter if it was the people who already knew, or if they just found out everyone was staring at him. Their collective gaze made him feel like an animal in a cage, and that ticked off the assassin. That was me, Your Grace. He schooled his emotions down to a more even level. Doing so meant that he was actively resisting the urge to frown at the beautiful woman as he spoke. Cersei may have been properly set back in her seat, but that didn't prevent the interest that painted her green eyes from being painfully obvious. She may as well have been leaning forward on the edge of her seat. My father would like to speak with you about what happened on that day. Any affinity he had to entertain a meeting with Tywin Lannister was brought to a swift end when he heard Elia's sharp intake. He didn't know if it was a gasp or a hiss, but it didn't matter. Disguising himself with a fake smile, Naruto bowed his head marginally. I'm afraid that I can't do that. It's my duty to be at Lady Elia's side at all times. It was dangerous grounds to openly deny the queen as he did, but Naruto showed no signs of being persuaded to change his plans. His courage or imprudence led to Cersei lifting one of her perfectly trimmed eyebrows. You would deny your queen. Naruto didn't need to respond because someone else spoke for him. That person turned out to be Cersei's husband. The king. Give it a rest, Cersei. He's here to protect Elia Martell, not to be a gopher for your father. If Tywin wants to talk to him, then he can do it some other time. The only sign that exhibited proof of her annoyance was the frown that tarnished her elegant face. I suppose you're right, my love. 1. Turning his crowned head back around to the group that was in front of him, the king of the Iron Throne took a much heavier expression. Gone were the bits of annoyance and sadness from before. It has been brought to my attention by my hand that you, Elia Martell, were no longer the wife of Rhaegar. While I don't know whose hand he took, the records say that this change happened before I butchered him at the Trident. Is this true? She was on the road to recovery, but the reminder that Rhaegar chose Lyanna Stark over her still brokered a response from Elia. Her clear and obvious frown was that response. This is correct, my king. Judicious eyes around the room would recognize the building unrest inside of Robert. Now his fingers were tapping frantically on the stiff arm of the throne. Instead of laying at peace, then the rapist saved your life. The kingly stag spouted his vitriolic hatred with no filter. Robert's hatred of the previous royal family ran as deep as all of the world's oceans, never to end and never to dry up. He'd never forget, let alone forgive, the family of the man that literally stole his betrothed from him, the beautiful Lady Stark. And if he was able to kill every last Targaryen, then he'd do just that with a thirsty smile on his face. The proof being Aegon. I suppose he, before anyone from Dorne could even think to breathe a sigh of relief, the king's hatred barreled ahead, making it clear that there was nothing to contain his fury. But your daughter, she is a Targaryen, a fucking dragon spawn. His shout was timed with him jumping out of the throne. His hammer rattled off the metal plates on the side of his body. The sound was like the tolling of a bell, because Robert's red wraith set everyone into motion. Oberyn reached for his spear, eyeing the Lannister guards all around the room. Naruto immediately placed himself between the seething monarch and Elia. Robert Baratheon may not have been the mountain, but his body and pure combat skill made him just as large of a threat, if not more of a threat, than the man whose eye Naruto took. Then there was the status of king that could prove to be a problem. Oh, but that wouldn't stop Naruto. The throne room weighed with gold was spared from seeing a bloodbath thanks to Jon Arryn taking a decisive step forward. Robert, stop this madness now. Would you rather be called Robert first of his name or Ares 3? A comparison between him and the family he hated was probably the only thing that could have cut through the unholy hatred that the Baratheon had for the dragons. From the stone, his glare was so deeply placed that it almost looked like his eyes were bloodshot. He needed a moment, but eventually Robert deflated with one massive sigh, falling back into his chair. The king looked drained, however it was only for a moment. There's no need to yell. Political decorum was left at the wayside during this moment of many passions. Jon could only sigh at his king's response. It was times like these that it was easier for him to see Robert as the boy he fostered in the Vale, and not the man who broke the foundations of Westeros. With things calmed down, he was able to look at Elia, who was in between Naruto and Oberyn, her two deadly sentries. Lady Elia, all you need do is revoke your daughter's right of succession to the throne and agree that from this day forth she will go by the name Rhaenys Martell. Elia took the breath that got stuck in her throat when she thought they might be attacked. When she finished her sigh, she looked up at the man she remembered thinking might be her salvation. He was no salvation. He was every bit the monster that the loyalists named him during the war. She glanced at Cersei, who was content to sit back and watch behind Jaime, who stepped in front of her after Robert's outburst. He was a monster that laid in bed with the Lannisters. I, Elia Martell, as the mother to Rhaenys Targaryen, do forfeit her right to the Iron Throne through succession. From this moment on, Rhaenys Targaryen no longer exists. My daughter Rhaenys Martell will be a proud, loyal daughter of Dorne. The man from Vale looked to the king, and after receiving a nod he turned back to Elia, looking past Naruto to do so. Your proclamation has been accepted. A formal document will be sent to your quarters to be signed on the morrow. Jon expected something more than a nod, but when he saw the state of the people in the room he understood why Elia was so short with her response. For Seven's sake, take your hands off your weapons, you fools. Hearing the normally calm Jon Arryn screaming at them forced the hand of the king's guards. That didn't stop some like Barris Tan Selmy and Jaime Lannister from looking relieved when they did so. Breathing easily once more, Elia leaned forward so that her words would be more easily heard by Naruto. Thank you. Naruto's only response was a twitch of a smile. Oberyn took a definitive look to verify that things cooled down when he witnessed the guards backing up. He too removed his hand from the shaft of his spear. With that bit of nasty business over, I have a request for the king, the former Lord of Storms, and dragged up an eyebrow. What is it? How about you add mine and Naruto's name to your tourney events? Day of the melee. The day of the melee portion of the king's tourney had finally arrived, and with it a prevailing sense of genuine excitement was injected into King's Landing. The people affected the most were The poor because the tyranny gave them room to breathe to live, which was something they couldn't do under threat of death during the tyranny of the Mad King. Not only that, but the number of shops that opened on the tyranny grounds were so varied and cheap that even the people living day to day could afford to purchase food, drink and other things before the event of the day began, an event that was open viewing to every man, woman, and child in King's Landing. The smell of food cooking filled the air, along with happy people talking and laughing to Naruto, who was meditating in the staging area for fighters. It was like experiencing a brand new place compared to the one he visited months ago. Though the smell was the same, against himself a smile gradually crawled over his lips. The good mood in the city was downright contagious. He couldn't think long about the things around him because he needed to focus on the fight that laid in front of him. The melee was the second event on the first day of the tourney, happening after the archery competition and before the joust on the second day. Thanks to Elliot and Oberyn, he found himself a contestant in this event. Logistically, the melee consisted of 5 heats with 50 men from around the world in each heat. The heat would be settled once there was only one man standing. Competitors could be eliminated through forfeiting or death until the heats end. Once all 5 heats were settled, the 5 victors were to conclude the melee in a free-for-all championship round where the winner would be awarded 15,000 gold dragons. Naruto was in the second heat of the day, which is why he was centering himself with meditation instead of going through a warm-up like some of the men around him. There was a part of him that wondered who he'd be fighting, but then again, not knowing was part of the melee. Not that I should have any trouble. Well, maybe if the other 49 men come at me. At once he chuckled off the unlikely thought. It's good to see that you're in high spirits. The melee fighter looked to his left where the smirking face of Jaime Lannister was present. He was peering through the fence, but Naruto could still see the whiskers of facial hair building on his jaw. You know, I was worried about how you might have fared in the sack. It looks like my worries were misplaced. Continuing the chuckle from earlier, the blonde sprung to a stand. He stretched out his back before he moved over to the fence, wearing a grin on his tan face. Jaime Lannister, I see you've survived this pit of vipers. How have the days been to you? Jaime shifted so that his shoulder was braced against the fence, which held upright even with his weight against it. I've had good days and bad days. When you consider all I used to have were bad days, I can say it has been a drastic improvement. Sounds like the sack was much better to you than it was to the others in power. Naruto sounded off with a wicked little smirk. Memories of killing the former hand made Naruto feel good to this day. Naruto, about the sack, I want you to know that I had no idea that the mountain had orders to kill Elia Martell and her children. If I had known then, perhaps I could have spoken to my father beforehand. His father told him that the generic order was to clean the Red Keep of loyalists, but Jaime wasn't dumb enough to think that his father didn't count on Elia and her children being there at the same time as the mountain. Jaime knew better than anyone that he had moments where he did questionable things, but to kill children when there were so many other options available made even the gold-blooded Kingsguard feel uncomfortable, doubly so that the mountain was always so close to people like his sister. What if Gregor snapped one of these days? What would happen to his sister then? The smile worked into Naruto's face was wiped away, and in its place was a frown that many people didn't live long enough to see. I should hope not Jaime. Anyone that knew Gregor Clegane was going to kill Aegon and Rhaenys and rape Elia will be answering to me, Naruto promised under the depths of a frigid whisper. Feeling a sudden coldness piercing through his person, Jaime pulled on the gold cloak around his body that much tighter. So a little something about you, Jaime muttered, more than happy to try and change the subject. What about me back then? I asked if you were a fighter. You told me no, but then you went on to stop the mountain and take one of his eyes. Why lie about that? Jaime wouldn't say that he was upset by the omission, but more annoyed than anything else. Unmoved by the spike in Jaime's emotions, Naruto shrugged his shoulders. Fighter sounds like something clean. I'm nowhere near as honorable as that. I do what it takes to get the results that I want, no matter what people might think of me. There was an unquestioned period of awkward silence for a handful of moments as both blondes kept quiet, for varying reasons. So where does this leave us? Gods, he wanted to kill himself for how awkward the words felt coming off his tongue. He wondered if Naruto felt any semblance of what he was feeling. Don't hurt innocent folk and don't help the wrong people, then you'll live just fine, my friend. There wasn't any mistaking the tone of Naruto's warning, but the wording was enough to make Jaime's head spin. Metaphorically, Jaime wasn't able to hold back the way that his eyes rolled after Naruto's answer. Yes, because that isn't terribly unclear. The rather famous knight replied with a heavy dosage of sarcasm that was becoming more and more natural to him. A smirk tweaked at the corner of Naruto's lips. It's only confusing if you already have a foot in business that's shady. You aren't stuck in the pits of muck, are you, Jaime? There was something about the way that Naruto spoke which made Jaime's chest feel tight beneath his breastplate. There was the way that he was being looked at through the fence that made those blue eyes feel like an animal waiting on its next meal. No, then there's No need to ruffle your coat, and as easy as that the unnatural pressure coiling itself around Tywin's prodigal son loosened, much to the immediate and immense relief of one Jaime Lannister. While Jaime was busy trying to regulate the slight palpitation in his heart, Naruto looked back to the men around him. A portion of the traffic lightened because fighters went out to the field of battle, which meant there was more room for the rest of them. "Who do you have in Heat 1, Sir Barristan Selmy?" was the immediate snap response given to Naruto by the Kingsguard. The heart of the matter was there simply wasn't anyone with the skill to challenge Barristan the Bold in his opening round. "I imagine that you're right. He would be the betting favorite for his trial." Naruto's composure hid the fact that he was downright giddy at the potential chance to test mettle against such a legendary knight. "I have to say I was quite surprised to hear from my sister that you were participating in the melee. If he was honest." Hearing Naruto's involvement in the brawl made Jaime wish he had put his name forth back when the choice was given to the men of the Kingsguard. "Yes, well, that was Oberyn's idea. I'm sure that you realize the mountain is also part of these fights," Jaime said cautiously of the subject that he saw to be rather iffy for his fellow blonde. Naruto's eyes closed, and for only a moment his face looked serene, but then this haunting smile worked over his expression in the darkness created by a passing cloud. Jaime thought he must have been seeing things, because it looked like his friend's facial marks were darker. "That's what I'm counting on." Melee grounds. The first melee heat wrapped up in just over an hour, with Barristan Selmy winning it all just like Jaime had said, and now the second heat was underway. Naruto stood stock still in an actual sea of humanity and heat, stationary, despite what was happening around him. More so than the people in the fight, Naruto had an invested interest in the viewing pavilion where all the nobles found their seats. His eyes quickly picked out Elia Oberyn and some Martell guards. They were on the far left of the pavilion. Under the furthest extremity of the overhanging roof next to the Martell family was the portion of space afforded to Mace Tyrell, Warden of the South and holder of the Reach, along with his wife Allery Tyrell, formerly Hightower. The Warden of the South was a round man with a full beard, who currently feasting on an assortment of ripe fruit. Naruto did notice that most of the man's guards were creating a line between Martell and Tyrell, which he thought was odd. In line on the other side of the Flowers of Highgarden was the current Lord of Storm's End, Robert's youngest brother Renly Baratheon. Though unproven and not of true age, the boy of 6 held the title of Lord and was surrounded by more guards than any other on account of his age and relation to the king. He seemed to be most taken with the action unfolding on the ground below. Closest to Renly was the king himself, who had the second most protection of all the lords. Not that anyone saying would charge a perfectly fit war-hammer-armed Robert Baratheon. On Robert's right was Renly, but on his left was Cersei, who seemed to be giving orders to some girl. There were also a few officials standing behind Robert. One he recognized as Jon Arryn. Lined up after the king's portion was Stannis Baratheon, a man of morals and of stern expressions. If the frown on his face meant anything, his just personality and high standards made him a perfect fit for the small council where he served as master of ships. And finally, there was the golden party of Lannisters, with Tywin Lannister in the center of a cluster of golden knights. Next to him, drinking wine, was a small man who, much like Mace, seemed more interested in the food and drink than the melee. There were a number of smaller houses on the rows below, but these were the main players. At least Jon Arryn wasn't blowing smoke and kept the Lannisters as far away from Elia as possible. Daiyu Milksop. It was pure combat acumen that had Naruto swaying out of the reach of the sword that was just thrust at his gut. Apparently someone had taken the liberty to attack him in the midst of this chaos. Not really looking at who, Naruto took the wrist attached to the offending sword and turned it the wrong way. There was a sharp crack, a cry, and a glint of the sword falling. That was until it was caught by Naruto and used to run through the stomach of its former master. And all of this happened in less than 5 seconds. When Naruto finally took the time to look at the man who attacked him, he saw an Esso's Sellsword dead at the end of what used to be a silver sword. Naruto used a smooth upward tug to free the dripping weapon with a wet squelch. That's why you don't charge blindly into the unknown. Planting his foot in the ground, Naruto turned sharply to the second man that came forth to fight him. The fighter from House Reed thought he had Naruto off guard, but the blonde's swift reaction cut the man's head clean from his shoulders. With a beautifully deadly swivel, you lose your life in your head. Naruto walked away from his second kill of the melee, but he didn't get all that far before he locked gazes with a roguish-looking man with the sigil of an azure rooster preening on his chest. A hungry smirk surged over his lips, and he rushed at Naruto, yet not before he cut down 2 men locked in a stalemate. Hoisting his sword up, Naruto caught the descending stroke of 2 blades. Naruto locked himself in a test of strength with the man from House Swift. Naruto's blue eyes were calm like water, but his foe's dark Eyes were jumped up with adrenaline. I know your face. The blonde assassin figured it wouldn't hurt to entertain the man for a moment. Do you now? Naruto inquired back like this was the most normal of conversations to have. Lord Tywin will give me enough gold to make my own house if I bring him your head. His remark came with a nearly obscene amount of greed. Then again, Naruto supposed he shouldn't be surprised that the tournament drew this kind of man. That's easier said than it is done, Naruto remarked with a smile that would have alerted the man to something gone awry had he known the blonde better. Suddenly disengaging himself from the locking of swords, he made the SWIFT man stumble forward, and before he could catch himself, Naruto caught the man's throat with his sword. And you're dead. When Naruto dislodged the sword he borrowed from number 1, a spurt of blood painted the chest piece of his leather armor, but he took the addition in stride and looked around as blood poured off the biting edge of the SO's metal. Flipping his grip, the assassin plunged his sword backward. His unseen target groaned out in pain as their thigh was pierced clean through its back. Unfortunately for them, Naruto was not done dishing out pain. He tore the blade up the man's thigh, cutting him all the way up to the hip before he abandoned the sword in the unlucky man's leg. Naruto never bothered looking back, since he already knew that the man would bleed out soon. Although Naruto was weaving through competitors, the melee ground was still very much crowded with hopeful warriors. This was proven all too true when someone was literally knocked back into Naruto's chest. Being the efficient professional that he was, the assassin caught the man and snapped his neck in one fluid motion. Hey, that was my kill, you fuck. Naruto blinked, then he glanced over the shoulder of the fry that he just killed, appearing innocent in a mocking kind of way. Sorry, it's tough to hear with all the yelling from the crowd. Did you say that I stole your kill? That's exactly what I said. Shit stain. The man was in full armor adorned with what appeared to be oaks, but he didn't have a helmet on for whatever reason. I won't get past my brother Ares with fuckers like you. And the way he seethed with a clear lack of self-control. Big brother issues here. I think I can fix this. Naruto's head dipped back behind the man in front of his chest, though his blonde hair could still be seen clipping over the top of the dead man's head. Come on, Euchre, ready your weapons so I can gut you. At first Naruto's tone was distinctly high, but by the end it was a deep slurred mumble. Are you mocking me? The Oak-Heart hopeful barked balefully at Naruto, who continued to use the corpse as a puppet. The man from the reach tried to look left and right past the body and at Naruto, but any time he tried, Naruto shifted so that the body was in the way, actions that only inflamed the anger within the young knight. Stop fucking with me. He raised his broadsword high over his head and went to cleave through Naruto's corpse, and all the sword hung over his head. When the buffer fell to the side, he had just enough time to widen his eyes before a trench knife was buried hilt deep in the center of his forehead, killing him instantly. Naruto pulled his new weapon from the man's head, and just in time, because he was forced to duck a sweeping sword. He did lose a number of hairs to the close call, but nothing more than that. Looks like there are some here taking this seriously. I almost didn't hear you coming over the roar of the crowd. His words were directed at the two towering men that stood in front of him. Both of the newcomers were dressed in stag-like armors that were fitted with helmets, and all the metals they wore were dark and were accented with copper to give the design of their armor some flavor. The man on the left held onto a sword and shield, while his compatriot sported a thick spiked mace glaring through his helmet, and over the rounded top of his shield the stag's blue eyes burned holes into an apathetic Naruto. You've done well, kid. If we kill you, then someone will notice us for sure. With a win here, there's no way that Lord Renly or Lord Robert won't knight at least one of us. The man holding the mace grinned as the sunbeams illuminated the 4-inch black spikes embedded into his mace. Naruto wore the saliva in his mouth a few times around, then he gestured over his shoulder, where a body was at rest a handful of feet back. That's what happened to the last man who wanted to make his name at my expense. Gentlemen, we aren't like that poor slob. The sword and shield user nodded his head towards his ally. Their nods were a sign that some kind of plan was to be sprung, because that was when the two men began to bracket, and Naruto, he was more than aware that he was being circled, but Naruto held his ground without fear. He may have been outnumbered and at a serious disadvantage when it came to gear, but none of those points against wiped the smirk from the dangerous man's face. Since you two showed that you can think, let me make you an offer. Take your weapons, forfeit the fight, and then you can both keep your lives. A true son of Storm's End doesn't run away. We'd rather die than be known as a coward. So be it. Naruto spun around and made a direct line for the man with the larger mace. Trench knives locked around his digits, he unleashed a series of rapid strikes that the big stag couldn't hope to block, be it the inability for the mace to block or simply because he was slow. The man wasn't able to stop Naruto from puncturing his armor. The bulky armor did its job for the most part, but the sheer number of stabs from the whiskered man made the stag wince. Under his helmet, he was saved from having his staggering posture exploited further when his comrade bashed Naruto in the back with a shield. Their problem was that instead of tumbling over, Naruto harvested the extra power pumped into him and transferred it into a brutally effective thrust that impaled one of his two trench knives in a crevice of the mace man's armor right over his shoulder. His pain-riddled shout marked the proof that Naruto's knife found flesh. Ignoring the discomfort from the studs in the rounded shield, he forced his body to shrug off the wooden buckler. Naruto used that breath of space to flip himself around. He was now facing the man who attempted to take his back. The blonde only had one trench knife left, but that didn't stop Naruto from shredding into the shield. Bracing for impact with his forearm, the standalone stag grunted against the tingling sensation in his forearm. It felt like his arm had insects crawling on it, but he blocked the strike, which is why he was able to look at Naruto with a satisfied smirk. His mouth was forced to stay quiet when he caught Naruto coming in the middle of a punch. The pure will of Naruto's exertion overpowered every other sound going. Particles of dirt rode blue wisps off the ground, all circling around Naruto as he slammed his balled-up fist into the handle of the trench knife. When his tautly grasped fist hit the knife, there was no faltering on Naruto's part. His flesh and bone clashed with steel warmed from his hand and continued on forward with fury. Being bolstered with the energy of Naruto's determined punch, the trench knife split the shield and continued on through the stag's armor. The jet stream of blood left by the drenched knife would be a reminder that the steel failed the brave man from Storm's End. If only the carnage carved out by the knife stopped there. The sanguineous-soaked weapon soared unimpeded for another handful of feet before it cut out the throats of two men who couldn't have been any more clueless as to what was coming. With those two fatalities added onto the total death count, the knife's warpath finally ended when the blade buried itself in the concrete of the pavilion amidst a spider web pattern of cracks and of course cries from the spooked nobles. It was safe to assume that at least 90% of the noble people in the viewing area weren't paying attention to the blonde hells. He didn't even have a last name to pique any interests in the first place. But there were two people that had special attention settled on Naruto, and they had their mouths left open in an unflattering manner. How powerful is that man? Oberyn all but balked in his shock. Seeing the normally daring man rooted in place with shock was a testament to the incredulity of what just happened. It wasn't normal, it was otherworldly. Unlike her rattled brother, Elia chose to keep her eyes on Naruto. During this whole charade, apart from her seldom used blink, she saw every man that tried to take his life and watched every deadly response from her friend. Words failed her at this moment, so all she could do was shake her head. This is real, right? He felt obligated to ask that question while his hands wrapped around the railing in front of him so tightly that his knuckles went white. Oberyn sacrificed a moment to look to his left and at the knife in the concrete, which was still dripping blood. Yes, it's very real. She couldn't hope to hear what Naruto was saying as he stood over one of his foes who was still alive. A lack of sound didn't stop the Viper Princess from being overcome with a bubbling admiration that heated her chest. She felt like a younger version of herself, not that 23 was old, and felt her heart beating faster. Naruto, you're amazing. As improbable as it felt, Elia saw Naruto turn in her direction. Through every person both on the inside and outside of the melee ground, his blue eyes locked up with her coffee-colored orbs. They connected with the other, and for that captivating moment Elia practically forgot to breathe. Her moment of suspension was snapped when a hand insistently jostled her right shoulder. When she turned to the offending hand, she shouted without even thinking about the nature of her response. What? The young man shied away from the anger of his sister. He certainly didn't see this kind of outburst coming from his more measured sibling. I said, do you think that anyone else saw what Naruto did? That was a question that made the woman clothed in a green dress frown. She cast a critical eye to her surroundings, trying to judge if their reactions merited any concern on their part. Mace was busy trying to have a conversation with young Renly. The king was focused on one of the largest jugs of wine Elia had ever seen. Meanwhile, the queen had her eyes closed in a moment of quiet deliberation. There might be some among the common people who saw what he did, she said, after seeing some beyond the fence, pointing at her friend and champion. The youngest Martell wilted upon himself before he sighed heartily and fell backward into his chair with his cheeks collapsed and eyes closed. Thank the gods for the small things, he muttered beneath the expulsion of a sigh. I take that back, we may have a problem on our hands. Elia's voice wavered with concern because she had to direct her brother's attention to the far end of the pavilion. There Tywin Lannister was sitting with his narrowed eyes on Naruto. She could only guess what Tywin was thinking about. There was a chain of colorful curses when Oberyn's gaze landed on the old lion. His wandering words were extreme even for his wicked tongue. Shit, and that was how his outburst of obscenities ended. Winner of Heat number 2, Naruto. Both Martells were so taken with what was happening around them that they completely forgot about the action down below. Looking back to the ground, they saw that a number of men were on the way out alive, and Naruto was pulling a sword from the belly of a Lannister. Refocused on the melee, Elia heard how the crowd cried in adulation for the winner. They're chanting his name, she commented, surprised by this turn of events. Most if not all of the crowd were men and women who were echoing Naruto's name. It was a sound that only grew louder when the blonde in the center of it all moved toward the fence to acknowledge as many of the people against the fence as he could. Come on sister, let's go visit our man of the people. Time skip. Those who were in charge of the tournament's logistics were kind enough to provide small tents to the winner of each heat. They could use these tents as a home of sorts between rounds. It was in one of these tents that Naruto resided and perched on a stool, wiping away the dried blood that painted his dark armor a faded crimson color. Drops of water slipped down his armor, but that didn't stop Naruto from making sure that his armor was clean. His fingers continued to implement enough pressure to break up the dried flakes of blood that clung stubbornly to his leather armor while Naruto hummed along to a song in his head. After a final comb over, Naruto held his equipment from beneath the shoulders to properly examine the state of his protective piece. He couldn't find any splotches of blood, so he moved to his left and settled the armor on a stand so it could dry. Now that his armor taken care of, Naruto was able to take a breath and look at himself. He found he had a distinct lack of injuries. There wasn't a nick in his shirt or a blemish on his skin. This lack of marks is what let Naruto know he was at the top of his game. That was bad news for anyone unfortunate enough to be put against him in the melee. That first round was a pretty decent trial run. The opponents will be of higher quality, but at least I know what to expect. It would have been a lie if Naruto said that he hadn't enjoyed his time in the melee thus far. To Naruto it was like coming back to life. After a period of prolonged hibernation, the Maelstrom got a distraction when the cloth curtain to his tent was brushed to the side. It became clear that the Martell siblings were the reason for that. When they walked into his tent, he gave both Elia and Oberyn a smile before he moved to stand in front of the pair of siblings. How's the tourney been so far? Elia was doing a shoddy job of hiding that she was checking Naruto over for injuries. She was happy to see that even the blonde man's muted orange shirt was undamaged. It's like every other tourney I've been to. With that said, I'm pleased that you won your round. Oberyn continued from where his sister left off, his cheeky grin expanding from one dimpled cheek to the other. It looks like you're becoming quite the popular man, Naruto. It won't be long before these people are calling you a hero. How often could an assassin be called a hero? It was a great story. The subject of this would-be story waved off the idea, considering it conjecture from his overactive friend. Naruto doubted that he was becoming anything resembling a hero to the people. A fight with a bunch of faceless nobles didn't make him a hero, or at least he didn't think so. I don't know about that. They're probably behind me because I am like them in a way. Elia was tempted to mention that every hero needed to start somewhere, but she held her tongue. She sent the assassin a smile that portrayed only a small amount of the admiration that coursed through her. Instead of fanning the flames set up by Oberyn, I don't think I've ever seen anyone fight like you, Naruto. Your movements are so precise, it's like watching a dancer move through battle. Taking her praise with an appropriate swell of pride, Naruto went to respond, but stopped himself when he saw the way that Oberyn was sulking. Hey, I'm an awesome fighter, and your brother, why don't you support me like that? She pulled off the imperious look excellently with her fingers laced and her chin turned up. If you were the best, you wouldn't have lost to Naruto. The smirk that crept onto her lips betrayed the taunting tone that she used against Oberyn. The first to crack was Naruto. He was followed by Elia, and finally Oberyn also fell to the wiles of laughter. It wasn't long before the whole tent was marinating with the sound of their merriment. When their combined laughter finally fell off, there was a moment or two of silence until Oberyn brought forth the question that guided them here in the first place. Naruto, what did you do to that man? A trench knife shouldn't be able to do what you forced it to do. Naruto could thank his training for the lack of reaction in the immediate face of Oberyn's pointed question. I've always been strong ever since I could remember. No, Naruto, we need an actual answer this time. Naruto did react. His lips jerked downward as his blue eyes stuck to the intense stare from a prying Elia Martell and her copper eyes. Sighing, he turned away from the pair and commenced to deliver some of the answers they sought. I'm not lying when I say that I've always been strong. It's a bit difficult to describe, but I'll do my best. You see, I have this energy inside of me, and it flows through my body as blood. Does you mean like magic? In Westeros, magic wasn't as openly discussed as other things because of the Targaryens, but Essos didn't possess such prohibitions. Essos was also where Oberyn learned about the more supernatural aspects of their world. The assassin's right cheek hitched up and bared one half of Naruto's mouth, which included a dash of white from his teeth. Sort of magic is a bit more difficult to describe than what I'm capable of using, he admitted with a faint shrug of his shoulders. What does that mean, Elia? may have been aware of some things about magic after living in the Targaryen house for long, but the way Naruto made things sound had her knitting her brows together in bewilderment. My teacher, he called what I use chakra. It's a word from a forgotten tongue that roughly translates to life force, and it allows me to enhance my strength among other things to help lend credibility to his claim. Naruto focused some of his chakra, which caused a soft blue hue, to spread over his arm, ignoring how the hairs on the back of his neck stood up on his skin. The Red Viper found himself gaping at the unnatural cloak of cerulean energy that encompassed the entirety of his friend's left arm. He had seen gold Valyrian weapons and more naked people than one could count, and here was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. Incredible. You said that you had a teacher. Where is he? Can he use this chakra too? Naruto chuckled under his breath. At Oberyn's failure to reproduce the lost tongue, he waited until Oberyn and Elia looked away from his azure arm before he spoke again. He needed to make sure they were focused, so he didn't need to repeat himself. First of all, it's called chakra, not chakra. Second, my teacher is probably in some forest somewhere in Westeros. Finally, he can't use chakra, but his connection with magic is what helped him find me when I was younger. He aided me with my gifts. Elia couldn't help herself. She walked towards Naruto and took him by his arm. She wasn't sure what would happen, if anything. So when a jolt followed the contact, she had to gasp inaudibly, "How? No, why can you do these things that no one else can?" Her question came at the same time that Elia felt a warm tingling sensation flow through her body. He looked down at her fingers, which were on the inside of his forearm. The chakra user smiled at Elia's question. Amused by it, I asked my teacher the same thing. Well, almost. He told me that I have a connection with the land. Most people have ties to a country, but my ties are to the world itself, or that's what he says, and I believe him. Like how Targaryens have a connection to dragons. The savior looked to the princess. He found that the southern lady was once again looking at the phenomenon manifested around his arm. I guess it's a little something like that. Admittedly, I don't know much about the history between Targaryen and dragon. Finally overcoming his shock, the Red Viper of Dorne asked a question to the blonde, who only got more remarkable as the days passed. What can you do with chakra? Chakra makes me stronger. It can be used to reinforce my body. It helps me climb surfaces. If I stick it to my hands or feet, it helps me move faster. That's how we got out of King's Landing so fast. Elia cut in with an exclamatory outburst that went well with her brown eyes in their current state. Her eyes were wide, but they were also looking up at the grinning form of the extraordinary assassin. Naruto confirmed her statement with a nod of his head. He also decided not to tell them about the downsides of chakra, like what would happen to him if he used too much of his gift. Doing that would only upset Elia, and that was something Naruto wouldn't do without sufficient reason. Ladies and gentlemen, the third heat is set to commence. It was the voice of the crier that swept the area, capturing the attention of the three people in the tent. Oberyn reacted first when he looked back over his shoulder towards the rays of sunlight that seeped in from the sides of the slightly opened cloth. We should get back to our seats, sister. I hear that Sandor Clegane is part of this next heat. Sandor Clegane was innocent when it came to her problems, but he suffered the burden of guilt by family blood. In Elia's eyes, his family's name marked him as someone that Elia could never trust, not after what happened to her family at the hands of his monster of a brother. Lovely, another Clegane. Her blatant sarcasm worked a laugh out of Naruto. There wasn't a moment where the unruly assassin was opposed to when Elia deviated from the path of a typical noble. He so disliked all that prim and proper behavior. His sudden laughter pulled Elia's attention back to him, and it came with a smile too. I don't know why they're using real weapons in this tourney, but you be careful out there. Do you understand me? Taking a moment to tease his friend, Naruto hid his impish grin by bowing to Elia. Yes, my princess. He knew what kind of response he'd get from the woman with that response, but he chose it anyway. Elia did not take the teasing well. She brought her hand down swiftly on the back of Naruto's head. In response, he muttered out a brief ow, but that faux pain didn't last long before the blonde was laughing. By the way, Naruto, do you know how to use a spear? Naruto straightened himself out. Then he studied Oberyn curiously. I'm competent with the weapon. Why? Because I know you need a weapon for the championship round. I've decided that you'll use my weapon. I'll have one of the guards bring you the Viper's Kiss before the final round starts. Marentrant Gregor, the Mountain Clegane, Sandor Clegane, Barristan, the Bold, Selmy, Naruto. Those were the names that found themselves as the last standing among their peers in the melee. They were the 5 men who proved through might, speed, skill, or savvy that they were the cream of the crop, some more viciously than others. This could lead one to think that there was mutual respect between the warriors, but that wasn't the entire truth. Sandor glaring holes through Gregor was the first example of this truth. Then there was Gregor, who was doing the same thing, but to our blonde hero. Ironically enough, both men from House Clegane were glaring at different people for the same reason: bodily disfigurement. The famous tourney knight Marentrant was doing his utmost to make himself look small among the lineup around him. It was a tactic he liked to use to ensure that his opponents overlooked him, which made it easier for him to win his battles. The plan was Not honorable, but it was clever. It was a plan of attack that won Maren plenty of tourneys in his day. By far the most collected among the 5 men were Naruto and Barristan Selmy. The latter adorned himself in the traditional knight armor, which included the helmet that hid his face. Meanwhile the assassin's face showed his confidence. His eyes were at peace, his breathing was calm, and his body was perfectly still despite the excitement, thrashing down on them from a raucous crowd thanks to his tall stature, which towered further above the rest in the pavilion. Robert's crown caught the light of the sun. When he climbed to his feet, the sun was blazing, the weather was fair. It was time for the final round of the melee. It was his duty as king to commence the fight, so that's what he'd do. I'm not going to waste my breath and your time. You're here for either glory, gold, or gore. Well, here's your chance to take it all. One of you 5 will best the other 4, so let's get the show on the road. Begin. The crowd's excitement shot up another few notches and came down on the arena like a landslide, vibrating the ground beneath everyone's feet. Naruto himself snorted once the king stopped talking. It was speculation on his behalf, but he was willing to assume that no royal speech would stand a test to Robert's. Yes, this was Naruto being sarcastic. Gregor coming right at him was what ended up interrupting Naruto in his thoughts. He didn't even have to react, because Gregor was intercepted by his kin Sandor. Brother faced brother, and their battle quickly progressed from there. The urge to fight took the 2 large men off to one side of the space allotted for the melee. Ever the shrewd knight Trant saw the 2 titans of humanity clashing and decided to execute the wise move. He shrunk down and slunk off to the opposite side, where he laid in wait until a moment where he could strike presented itself. Their combined actions left Naruto standing across from Barristan Selmy. The 2 men that were so different from the other locked gazes with each other. I saw you fight through your heat, and I was interested in your skills. It seems that I'll have the opportunity to test your strength for myself. Barristan spoke with a tight smile obscured beneath his helm. His words suggested a readiness to fight, but his hand remained calmly placed on his opposite forearm for the time being, pulling Oberon's trusted spear off his back. Naruto gave the weapon a few twirls before he buried the bottom of the wooden shaft into the ground beside him. We both wanted to fight the other. I've always wanted to see you fight in the war, but my desires were never enough to involve myself in a bloody conflict that never really concerned me. A war that consumed the entire Western world didn't concern you. The sarcasm and the disbelief just poured off the old knight's tongue. He couldn't believe that there was a single man, woman, or child that the last war didn't affect. Naruto shrugged his shoulders flippantly, his fingers curled considerately around the diameter of the spear shaft in preparation of what was to come. I'll admit that I got bored from time to time and involved myself, but no lord or realm owns my loyalty, therefore their squabbles did not concern me unless someone tried to make it concern me. And yet here you are on behalf of Dorne. I don't think you're nearly as free as you might think as a man that served through a multitude of wars and even more kings. Barristan was far from supportive of the carefree way that Naruto regarded their recent past. The peace of mind presented by the knight left Naruto frowning. Be careful with what you say next, old man. I'm no one's sword to point. I'm here because I'm doing a friend a favor and a service to the world. You call killing ill-prepared men and a tourney a service. Your heat was the second most bloodied, behind only Gregor Clegane's. In comparison, Barristan's heat was the only one where no one died, and part of that was Barristan's use of a tourney weapon. Unfortunately, even he could not convince the king to change his plans for the tournament. The more that he listened, the more that Naruto thought Barristan was holding something personal against him, when in reality it was nothing more than survival. In Naruto's eyes, he knew that Barristan the Bold was honorable, but this was ridiculous. Those men came at me with the intent to kill, so I responded in kind. It was them or me, not some senseless slaughter. If you want to blame someone for their deaths, then blame them for their choices, or blame your king for allowing real weapons. There were many who tried to talk him down from the idea, but he was certain that people craved actual combat and a tourney for once. Hopefully the death count will be a reminder to Robert that we can't afford to waste human life like this in the future. The losses that the City Watch and Kingsguard suffered from this tourney had soured Barristan's mood. Doesn't sound like my problem. So are you gonna fight me? Yes, with my tourney weapon. No killing? Then fine by me. Naruto readied his spear and even out his stance so it was better balanced for a long weapon like a spear, thus showing the time for talk was over. Unlike in his previous encounters, Naruto didn't have plans to rush in blindly, not into a man with Selmy's skill set. As such, the 2 men began the game of circling each other, setting up physically and mentally for what they needed to do. Naruto heard the people in the crowd cheering for his opponent, thus cementing who was the crowd darling, pushing their adoration out of his brain. Naruto started breaking down the few weak points he saw in Barristan's armor. There weren't many notable spots, but there were a few breaks in the armor that he could exploit. I need to be precise and forceful if I want to score anything meaningful. This being a non-lethal encounter hindered what he liked to do, but Naruto was confident that he He just started firming up his grip on the Viper's Kiss when his foe came forth. Now it was time for the fight to begin. Naruto hit against the inside of Barristan's blade with the tip of his spear continuously. The contact between weapons wasn't much. What it did was consistently stop Barristan from following through with his attacks. This sequence dragged out their battle for minutes, where no man acquired an advantage over the other. It was a total stalemate which only fed the crowd's enthusiasm. Barristan broke away by taking a long stride back from the duel's meshing point. He used the space to prime himself for a single massive strike that would overpower the feeble defense provided by a spear. Naruto saw this and extended himself out to catch the knight in the chest. Since his arms were up high, this turned out to be a feint, and falling for it allowed Barristan to drop his blade on top of Naruto's right shoulder. The dulled sword dug into his armor, but it wasn't sharp enough to cut through Naruto's gear. Being punished for his mistake didn't stop Naruto from coming back with a response of his own. He threw his spear into his left hand and swept outward, crashing his weapon into Barristan's ribs, which conceived a suitable distance between the two of them. Clever old bastard. Naruto begrudgingly complimented the 46-year-old man while circling the shoulder that was struck. In the meantime, Barristan steadied his posture and waited for Naruto to make the next move. The blonde assassin didn't leave him idle for long. Naruto's path ahead was a straight one, and when it looked like he was destined to barrel right into Barristan, he stopped himself by jabbing the end of the Viper's Kiss into the dirt. Naruto used the length of the weapon to vault himself into the air. His plan genuinely surprised the traditional combatant and forced Barristan to block the jumping kick. With the broader level portion of his blade, a grunt forced itself out of Barristan's mouth as he faltered back under the force of his foe's flying punt. Naruto made use of his spear's superior reach at this point to gain an advantage. He used his extra reach to lay a clattering of blows into the sides of the older man's ribs and knees. None of his strikes broke the armor, but they did jostle Barristan's body about, tenderizing and weakening the human flesh underneath. It took some time, but Barristan endured the assault on his person, lashing out with a wide slash. Barristan timed his attack with Naruto lunging at him to prevent himself or Oberyn's spear from being sliced into. Naruto stuck himself to the ground with chakra. Doing so stopped any momentum he had generated and left him standing barely outside of Barristan's reach. Naruto grinned at the man. Despite their status as enemies, he took one of his hands and ran it through his warm blonde hair. "You almost caught me with that one." It was a decent recovery. Grunting under his breath, the knight stared at Naruto through the pointed helmet of silver alloy that rested on his head. He knew the young man was proficient. He had to beat a test and best the mountain, but his speedy strikes were so unorthodox that they still caught him off guard. "How is it that you fight like that?" The gentleman that slew the last Blackfire pretender had seen both power and pace. He had bested both assassins and knights, but none of them moved with the nuance that this man did. It was like looking into organized chaos. It was nearly impossible to predict. Naruto's grin extended into a smile that revealed every one of his white teeth, some of which seemed rather sharp in the delivery of his articulation. "Ideal in death, that's how Robert may have been king, but ere that he'd always judge himself as a warrior." Admittedly, he didn't pay much thought to the earlier rounds, but now that the best were doing battle, he couldn't look away. For now he was part of the crowd watching the fight, and nothing more. A fight between the world's greatest knight and the one to topple the mountain. Supposedly foregoing the wine in favor of watching the fight, he focused on trying to pick apart the style Naruto employed, because Naruto was the only one Robert hadn't seen in action. The first thing the king noted about the blonde was his incredible accuracy, especially when it came to his blows. Every time the blonde parried Barristan, he did so without any uncertainty. It showed how supremely confident he was, and clearly, it was well-deserved confidence. The king wasn't below admitting to himself that he believed the blonde was a fool when he entered the fight in simple leathers. But then the fight happened. Not only was he allowed to see the blonde keep up with his best knight, but Naruto even forced Barristan to rely on things like feints instead of pure swordplay. It was unbelievable. That boy. Following the musings of the king, the hand leaned towards the back of Robert's chair. "Is there something you required, Robert?" Robert scratched at the beard on his jaw. "That boy, the one who came with the martels, do we have anything on him?" the king asked with a genuine curiosity regarding the mysterious champion of Dorne. "I've looked into what the previous king kept, but there wasn't anything to find. I've even asked Varys, and he also has nothing." John muttered a reply with a frown touching his aged features, which were sullen during this confession of failure. Robert grunted and took a swig of wine to help push aside his irritation. Figures John didn't let the juvenile response halt his comeback. "I've had Varys keep tabs on him since entering the city, but all he does is sleep, eat, and stand guard over Lady Elia. I can't see why you're so interested in the lad. I'd say that young Sandor holds more promise than Lady Elia's bodyguard. I know that you're getting old, John, but has your eyesight already failed you?" Robert boldly taunted the man who helped him grow into a man. His chuckle was loud enough that it drew the attention of both Renly and Cersei away from the fight for a Moment before they moved on to other things, he knew that the jab was meant in good nature, but no one truly wanted to be reminded of their losing battle with time. I see that you're in a good mood today, Robert. Say that I don't see what you see. What is it that I'm missing in this Naruto fellow? He doesn't stand and fight like a knight, he doesn't move like a sellsword, he doesn't shy away like a faceless. He's something different, almost like a dancing master, but at the same time different from that. John's face dropped into a dry expression. Yet another masterful use of your words. Well done, Robert. It makes me wonder if you ever paid attention to my lessons. I described that boy perfectly. He's different, and if you don't believe me, then take a look at that. What is this? A visibly shaken Barristan Selmy forced the words out while doing his best to sound as firm as he stood. It was something that was made difficult to do. Considering what his eyes were showing him, he'd say that what he saw defied logic, but in reality it only defied the limits he believed existed. What Naruto had done to create such a disturbance in his foe's calm facade was perform a physical feat that Barristan had never seen before. Naruto may have been a single man, but he was moving with enough speed that as he circled the famed night, Naruto resembled a hungry dire wolf. On the hunt, he held the spear across the top of his shoulders the long way. The rest of his body was stuck in a rotating cycle. Naruto's entire body faced down towards the ground as the killer of men rotated around Barristan. As his namesake implied, the incredible thing about his movements was that he did so without slipping, breaking stride, or most importantly, without giving Barristan a chance to step out of his compromised position at the center of Naruto's peculiar attack. You know something? I honed this technique out in Essos. It inspired so many people who came to the pits that they called my performances the songs of death. A bit too wordy for my tastes, so I changed it, named them death songs. He didn't even stop his spinning to speak. Naruto's bit of insight assaulted Barristan's ears from all sides. Due to the nature of his spinning circles, the experienced guard remained calm as he could. He refused to allow Naruto's strange style throw him any further off his game. Focus. His battle techniques may be strange, but it is still a circle at the end of the day. That means I know where he'll end up, and that's when I can strike back. Barristan used what he perceived to be Naruto showing off to track his moves down to a precise repetitive motion, biding his time until he felt a burst of wind on the hairs spilling out of his helmet. He slashed down with his tourney sword. When the knight saw the dark mass of his opponent moving towards his sword, he knew that he cracked the code. He was counting the moments until he met his mark. Then something he hadn't counted on happening occurred. His blade didn't hit Naruto, but it did bounce off the twirling length of Naruto's spear. Their collision knocked Barristan off point, which opened his shoulder to a slap from the spear he didn't see coming. The knight grunted and tried his best to control his current predicament. Despite another failure to reassert control, he still has that much control of the spear. While he moves like that, this isn't good. He can attack me from any angle he fancies, and if I give too much attention to one side, then the other side will suffer. It could have been the heat or the situation, but something made a bead of sweat slide down the slope of Barristan's nose. At least there's a bit of good news for you, Barristan. The bards won't be playing your death song because I'm a man of my word. Naruto broke into the solitude of thought that Barristan fell into by interjecting his cheery voice. Smile and all, Barristan's helmet hit it well, but he was feeling an extreme amount of frustration with his lack of progress. A less than subtle gesture of that frustration was the way his hand tightened around the hilt of his sword. This whelp isn't taking me seriously. That revelation stung his pride far worse than any of Naruto's previous attacks. The knight grew tired of Naruto's carrion behavior because in this situation he was the prey. If I can't count on my sword, then I'll use my body to break free from this bind. He shouldn't be able to take the entirety of my larger body. The world famous man lowered his head and readied his weight behind his right shoulder. He had an idea that he was convinced would work for him. No different from a berserk animal trying to break from its cage. Barristan rushed straight ahead. You really shouldn't have put your head down here. Let me show you why. Thanks to a steady hand placed on the center of the spear shaft, Naruto was able to twirl his spear freely as Barristan came in. Naruto opened up by crushing the right side of the knight's helmet with his weapon. As his enemy reeled back, Naruto was able to switch the hand he used to wield the spear. This time when he rocked his opponent's skull, it was with a powerful attack that slammed into the left half of the knight's head. The consecutive barrage of attacks from Naruto drained away Barristan's energy. The sudden onslaught was a flurry of fierce strikes that Naruto capped off with a flourished upward strike that snapped Barristan's head and neck back and sent his helmet soaring into the air. The crowd's collective gasp sucked away the zeal for the day's festivities. Many of the people in the amassed group saw Barristan Selmy as an idol that people aspired to be. Seeing him in such a compromised state was jarring to many. Naruto waited until the knight's helmet hit the ground before finally breaking the silence. That glaze in your eyes and the fogginess in your head means that you're concussed. I'd yield if I were you, Sir Barristan. If Naruto said that he wasn't excited about this little dance he got to share with Barristan the Bold. Then that would be a massive lie on his part. He was aware that this was a glorified sparring session and nothing more. He didn't care what they called this because he got what he wanted. Naruto had fought Barristan Selmy and he won. The typical duel often didn't last longer than 10 minutes because more often than not the better man proved himself early. 10 minutes or not, Elia couldn't be tenser than she was during the 10 minutes or so that Naruto battled Barristan. She could hear all she wanted about Naruto's prowess, yet seeing it in person was something that Isla wasn't sure she could take. This stress might be the death of me, she muttered through a practiced deep breath, and a cloth that she used to wipe the sweat from her brow. Naruto is every knight's worst enemy, even one like Barristan Selmy. Oberyn's proclamation came in sharply with his arms indolently crossed. Across the chest of his fine green dress attire there was a smirk on his mysterious features, created in part thanks to it being his weapon, shown off by Naruto. Concerned with her friend's well-being, it was understandable that Elia overlooked the more fine minutiae when it came to armed conflict between two warriors. What do you mean by that? Oberyn, his sister, knew plenty, but combat was not included in that strong base of knowledge. That's why the younger Dornishman tried to put together an analogy of sorts to help paint a picture. Think of them like a rock in water. Elia Barristan is the rock. He is stern and is hard to move. That means Naruto is water in this instance. That's correct, sister. Naruto's fighting style is like moving water. Barristan may be able to hold Naruto back for a short time like rock, but like water, Naruto doesn't need long to either go around Barristan or through him. And from what the young Viper saw thus far in the melee, it was clear to him that his assassin friend could do the same to any knight. She was beginning to understand what her brother was suggesting, or at least she thought she understood what he was attempting to say. So Naruto won the fight because he fights in a way that's more flexible than Sir Barristan's style, something like that. Oberyn paired his response with lifting his hand and giving it a shaky wobble to confirm that his sister was almost correct in her deductions. I think the better way to say it is that Naruto is more fluid. Knights like Barristan stick to one way of fighting, whereas Naruto isn't confined to a single approach or style. Naruto uses what he thinks will be most effective and changes what he does on the fly. Naruto can and will beat any knight fighting like that. That's what I think. Elia evened out the infrequent wrinkle in the material of her dress. The beautiful widow drove out one last sigh before she looked out at the field of battle. I don't care what style Naruto uses, I care that he comes back safe. Oh ho, what's this I'm hearing? Does my precious sister have feelings for our fearless assassin compatriot? Oberyn was ready and willing to tease his sister for her perfectly natural attraction to another person like he was. Every time the opportunity presented itself to taunt her, the proof could be found in the way he wiggled his eyebrows at her. Her capacity to resist her reaction of blushing was accredited to being worn down by repeated taunts and jests like the one she heard now. Rather than going red, she huffed at Oberyn after her eyes stole a last glance at Naruto. I'm merely happy that my friend is unharmed, as you should be. Oh, I'm happy, but I'll be downright ecstatic when Naruto guts that bore down their gods. I wish I was the one to skew that one-eyed pig. The Red Viper tried to hide the last part amid a murmur, but he was overheard by his sister. Elia stretched her hand out and placed it softly on top of his shoulder to help soothe over his anger. She rubbed on the back of his shoulder before she squeezed it. Naruto will take care of it. He'll kill the mountain. Naruto stood calmly by while his defeated foe was taken from the field. Barristan had admitted defeat after their last encounter, leaving Naruto to claim victory. Barristan was a decent first fight for what was coming, but the experienced knight never really had a chance. His way of fighting was much too rigid to test Naruto. That's one down. How many more to go through? He spun himself around to scout out what had happened while he was busy exchanging blows with the bold knight from the Kingsguard. What Naruto spotted waiting for him was the mountain position with a foot on his brother's chest and his sword waiting to be plunged downward into Sandor's heart. Did it count as kinslaying if it was done under the guise of a tourney? Absorbing a large breath, the sunshine-haired slayer prepared his lungs for what he planned on saying. Now he needed to make sure that his voice was as loud as he could make it. Doing this guaranteed that Gregor heard him. Hey bitch. The only thing that compared to what was left in the aftermath of Naruto's shout was a graveyard. In a way it was fitting for how stiff the people around the melee became after hearing his insult. It wasn't every day that the people got to hear the most feared knight in Westeros insulted so directly. Naruto realized that even Sandor was looking his way with an incredulous expression. Perhaps the only person who wasn't worried was the man who hurled the insult. His plan worked like a charm because Gregor shifted his focus from killing his kin. Now the man known as the Mountain was glaring over his shoulder at Naruto. Gregor had a helmet on, but that didn't stop Naruto from visualizing the one-eyed look. He knew Gregor had. Naruto refused to back down from the murderous man. He doubled down on his verbal assault. Yeah, I'm talking to you, bitch. Are you fighting your brother to protect yourself from me? I didn't know the infamous Mountain was such a craven. Gregor's stationary form began to rumble with an unhealthy amount of rage. No, it was no longer rage. which fed the mountain what he felt for the speedy blonde was nothing short of pure hatred. Forgetting his brother like he was an ant, Gregor stepped off his beaten kinsman and turned fully towards Naruto. You smirking mockingly at Gregor. The chakra user bucked the spear casually atop his shoulder. Long time no see, I hope your life as a cyclops is treating you alright. Naruto's words showed that he wasn't afraid to stoke the flames of fury that would have consumed most ordinary men like poking a bear. The eldest scion of House Clegane continued to shudder in a fury beneath his heap of metal armor. His blood rushed, his muscles clenched in angst, and his entire being screamed for the most painful death he could muster for the blonde fucker in front of him. I'm gonna cut you into bits in front of your Dornish bitch. Naruto allowed himself to be distracted by the amusing occurrence of three men helping Sandor out of the arena. After realizing that his attention went wayward, he shifted his attention back to the enraged mountain. Yes, while that sounds terrifying, take a look at yourself. You had trouble with your little brother. What makes you think you can beat me? The Whisker Man asked with a derisive smile. Either way he packaged it, there was some truth hidden in the insults that Naruto aimed at Gregor. What used to be an imposing wall of armor was now dented, cut, and tarnished from trading lethal blows with his equally vicious sibling. The right segment of armor that covered a portion of his chest was torn off, leaving his chest to be a clear target for Naruto's spear. Gregor Clegane's entire body lurched as he let out a primal roar brimming with rage. Those heated emotions urged him to try and cut Naruto from shoulder down to his opposite hip in a single sadistic motion. His strides were long and his swing even longer, which gave Naruto more than ample enough time to shuffle out of the falling sword's root with nobody there to catch it. The sword carved into the grass and ground 4 yards in front of Naruto. He gave the massive cleaver that Gregor called a greatsword a considerable glance. That was close. You might have gotten me if I was asleep. Naruto's toying comment came with the outsets of a smirk that colored his twitching lips. Gregor permitted himself a low growl before he rushed towards Naruto, slashing and swinging like a wild man at his most hated enemy. Every strike was either swatted aside or evaded by the nimble blonde. His strength normally won out against his typical foe. It didn't work against Naruto. His one-handed grip was too loose and too weak to be effective against the blonde. Stand fucking still and die like a man. Twirling away from their latest clash, Naruto let his graceful footwork carry him a handful of feet clear of a seething Gregor who stumbled onward clumsily. Is this all you can do? Is that your best? Perhaps I should have killed you back when you tried to kill Elliot and Rainey's Martel, because this is embarrassing. What Naruto let go from his lips was the truth, but to people not in the know he was bringing up a mere rumor. Not only did he bring up a rumor, but his strength gave the rumor credibility. He heard the gasps and whispers spread as the crowd began talking about the former wife of Rhaegar and her daughter. Good. He spared a moment's glance to Elia, and he was pleased that her face was steady as stone. It would have been unfortunate if his words upset her, but this needed to be done. The people needed to know the monster for who he was. Unfortunately, Gregor was far from focused on cooperating with his plan. Anything that didn't involve the immediate death of the blonde and leather was not on his mind. Gregor stiffened his first hand and laid his second over the first so his grip was secured before he threw himself at Naruto with a quicker deep angle slash. He didn't find anything but the air since Naruto slid into the opening beneath his left elbow. Naruto took his back in one movement and brandished the Viper's Kiss in another. Lowering the spear, he hacked across the back of Gregor's foot with the serrated flank of the spear's metal edge. His targeted attack on Gregor's Achilles made the massive man teeter forward with a shout of pain as his opponent was left to struggle. The assassin with azure eyes walked forward confidently with a glare for Tywin Lannister in his section of lions. The azure eyes of the assassin brewed up a pair of matching storms, a total departure from the levity that his eyes once held. Are those the kind of screams you created? He may have posed that question to Gregor, but everyone at the melee knew that the upstart blonde was truly speaking to the Warden of the West. Naruto's focus being on the Lannister patron allowed the giant Clegane the time he needed to recover. Gregor wasted no time in turning so that his bulldozing path was pointed right at Naruto. He surged for Naruto's back with his heavy sword pointed ahead, ready to impale its steel straight through Naruto's spine. He saw the eyes of those like Jaime Oberyn and Elia widen as Gregor got closer, and he still didn't move to stop him. But there wasn't any fear or concern from the blonde. Naruto only showed a sense of strength. Sensing the attack, he waited until Gregor's sword was nearly on top of him before he kicked the back of the spear upward at the last possible moment. The spear shaft was hardly a blur as it jumped up and struck the underside of the mountain's jaw. Staggered from Naruto's blow, he stopped in place with his head forced to look up skyward, while Naruto spun on his feet to face him. The Blonde drove the spear down from the heavens, leaving it to build momentum and speed that all came thundering down on the crown of Gregor's skull. It was a shock that the wood managed to hold its integrity after the collision that dropped Gregor to a knee. Peering soullessly at the man on his knee, Naruto sent Gregor sliding on his back with a single kick to the center of the man's broad chest. Get up! Naruto's quiet order shook the silent audience to its foundations. It was far from what was considered proper, yet Oberyn couldn't help but stand up from his seat as he watched the fight unfold. He wanted to be the one that claimed vengeance on behalf of his sister, but if it had to be someone else, then he'd want it to be someone who he respected like Naruto. He could live with that outcome. It's like he is a completely different person thinking back on it. Other than their scuffle in the sands of Sunspear, Oberyn had never seen Naruto truly fight. He sparred and trained, but when they did, Naruto was always friendly and in a good mood. This was perhaps the first time that Oberyn had seen Naruto in a bad mood. I've seen him like this once. It was just after he stopped that man in the Red Keep. He was so serious that nothing I could have said or done would have changed his mind or prevented him from doing what he felt needed to be done. Elia wasn't sure if she should call it conviction or stubbornness, but either way it was clear that this was a piece of Naruto that no one could challenge. At least that's what she believed. Naruto proved to be a popular topic in the pavilion, and not just amongst his friends. His performance thus far had earned the man with no family name a fan in the form of one Renly Baratheon. The young lad's dark eyes were brightened with admiration as they gazed at the blonde's unmoving back. Looking from one person he admired to the other, Renly had to ask a question that he couldn't hold on his tongue any longer. Do you think that Naruto will kill the mountain brother? Ordinarily it would be disconcerting for a boy of 6 years to be talking so flippantly about something like death, but this was par for the course when it came to a Baratheon man. They were a family of fighters, true to the last. Anything's possible in a fight. Renly. Robert handed out a retort that was swift and meant to tame Renly's childish excitement. It didn't work. Being near the front of the pavilion in the first possible row of seats, he didn't need to worry about full-grown adults blocking his view. That didn't stop Renly from standing up so that he could better see what was happening. The boy with Baratheon blood in his veins was giddy with enthusiasm. I want to fight like Naruto when I'm older. That got one of Robert's dark eyebrows to raise in interest. He turned to look at his littlest brother, who himself was looking at Naruto. I thought you wanted to be a knight. He spoke of the dreams that Renly had been going on about over the past year or so. Maybe his little brother needed a reminder of what he wanted. Nope, not anymore. Naruto beat Ser Barristan, and now he's beating the mountain. He's really strong. I want to be strong like that too, so I can be king someday. Robert's reaction to the way that his naive sibling painted the picture of his future was to have a good laugh. Renly would learn someday that it wasn't that easy, but for now Robert would allow him to dream about chasing shadows. Jaime wasn't far from the two conversing brothers thanks to his place at Cersei's side. His post as the royal guard enabled him to overhear every last word the two Baratheons said, and he found himself agreeing with Renly about Naruto's strength. At least you may have done it unintentionally, father, but you made an enemy out of a man of blood when you intentionally let the mountain off his leash. I am your son, and you are the shield of Lannisport, yet there will be a day when your shield breaks, and I won't be there to save you. Are you ready for that? Jaime was left to wonder that question while he looked at his father. The man was too busy glaring subtly at Naruto's back to even notice his son's gaze. Don't hurt innocent folk, and don't help the wrong people, then you'll live just fine, my friend. Those words that Naruto said to him earlier in the day played back in his brain like the lyrics to their house's song. You are far from an innocent father. I only hope that my siblings don't follow you on the path to ruin, he thought solemnly, gazing at both Tyrion and Cersei. I told you to get up. Naruto barked at the man he deposited flat on his back with a fearless glare. For the infamous fighter, sending Gregor to the dirt was a decent start, but nothing short of soaking his spear in Gregor's blood would suffice on this day. Using his blade to brace himself, Gregor managed to work himself back to a standing position in front of Naruto. It hurt like a bitch to put weight on his injured Achilles. Nevertheless, he swallowed that pain and used the misery as fuel to empower his savage glare. The blonde floated the tip of his spear up a handful of times, bouncing it northward to help encourage the nearly frothing man that stood opposite of him. That's it, get up so that I can kill you. Okay, so maybe encourage was the incorrect connotation for Naruto's intentions when it came to Gregor. You first. Gregor howled, rushing at Naruto to cleave the brazen blonde into two different pieces. Naruto let his hand wander from the spear. He reached underneath his black leather armor, and in a smooth motion he yanked that hand out and turned his wrist as he released a black projectile from the end of his motion. The black knife, the kunai, glimmered. During its advance towards Gregor, it raced underneath the sunlight like a star in their spotlight, and at the last second there was an untraceable hum of blue energy that coated the kunai until it split the knight's thick armor with ease. The mountain's grimace and his subsequent scream was heard from hair to flea bottom. His massive body shook in distress while his grip grew weaker until he no longer had the strength to support the sword that fell from his limp hand. He gnashed his teeth together at the same time that he clasped his injured wrist with his good hand so that he might stop it from shaking. As the pain began to clear out, so did his vision. It was like Naruto had tapped right into Gregor's mind, because what Naruto said next was a direct reflection of the mountain's thoughts. You recognize that, don't you? It's one of the knives I used to take your eye when you stormed the Red Keep during the sack. Naruto was deliberate in the way he made his voice carry. This way he ensured that even the furthest sections of the tourney grounds could hear what he had to say about that infamous day. Outright in a pant at this point, Gregor's good hand wrapped around the kunai and plucked it out with a sharp inhale. His hand was so large that it covered the bottom half of the bloody blade, which looked tiny in comparison. When he looked up again, he saw Naruto literally in his face, something that shocked him. While the thinner of the two men was cocked back, with the point of his spear ready to be launched into Gregor's helmet. However, instead of following through with the strike, he spun the spear's bite and used it to clip under the chin portion of Gregor's headgear. With a strong flick, the helmet was launched into the air, showing his entire skull fresh with a bleeding cut that went down the center of the mountain's wide chin. For the second time in as many fights, Naruto had torn the helmet off of his opponent. Unlike when he had done so to Baristan, the blonde walked away from his opponent. This way everyone saw what lurked beneath the helmet with their own eyes. Some looked on with morbid fascination at the macabre scene, others turned their heads away before they released the contents of their stomachs. There were gasps and there were cries, but most importantly, Naruto had everyone's attention, because standing there under a sheen of sweat and dripping blood that flowed down his fat neck was the mountain. With the way he had his head up, there wasn't any way to miss that he was missing an entire eye. There wasn't anything where that eye should have been. Nothing but a gruesome void that was complemented in the most ghoulish of ways by the scar tissue around the empty socket. Gregor's expression was only made to look worse due to the way his glare tightened the muscles around where his eye should have been, taking his time to walk around his disarmed opponent in a grandiose circle that left him to prowl the space with his arms open as a means for attention. Naruto was deliberate with every step. People of King's Landing, do you see this? This is the monster that has been living among you since the rebellion ended. He has butchered hundreds and done foul deeds by the thousands, and for what? When Naruto stopped his casual gait, he very purposefully placed himself on the parcel of land that existed directly in front of King Robert's chair. He let the spear run the length of his arm, which made it look like an extension of himself. As he aimed at Gregor, this monster has killed people in this very city. He has shown that no life but his matters to him. He has taken an infant by its skull and crushed the poor babe's head like an egg. And do you know what happened to this poor excuse for a man? Naruto cried out passionately to the crowd who waited for his answer. Naruto saw it all. He saw that he owned the attention of everyone, from the nobles in the pavilion to the common folk that lined the entirety of the arena. In one unbroken circle of human mass, he was rewarded by his king for killing a child who wasn't old enough to be out of his crib without his mother. Let me ask this: where's the justice in that? There is none. And why was it? Because he's some famous knight from a self-important family that rules through gold. Well, I say enough with that shit. Naruto was the one who punished the child murderer. I took his eye from him, knowing that this day would come, the day that I slaughter him like the beast he is and show the world that no one is above consequences. His words started with a single person clapping, but then the emotions of the people caught fire, and soon most, if not all, of the crowd was roaring in approval of the mysterious blonde's sentiment. None of them knew who he was before today's festivities, but that didn't stop their support. Their unified wave of belief was so intense in its fervor that it was shaking the grounds themselves. Many of the nobles were growing noticeably nervous at the uproar being made, well apart from Oberyn, who joined in with the crowd willfully. To me it doesn't matter if you have Lannister gold, the king's favor, or a reputation built on blood. There is nothing in this world that will protect those who do wrong from me. Do you hear me? We are not your toys to toss aside. His passion-infused rallying cry inspired the commoners and served as a warning for the lords and ladies of Westeros' houses. That swirl of emotion came to a focal point in the form of the determined assassin known by the name Naruto. You talk too much. Reclaiming use of his hand once again, Gregor wasted no time before acting. His speed was far greater than someone his size had any right of possessing, but he still wasn't fast enough to touch Naruto. The speed disparity shined through when Naruto flowed around Gregor just before the monster's fingers could clinch their clasp on him. He executed his motion perfectly, and due to that he found himself stood in the shadow of an angry man. His palm struck up to latch against the back of the mountain's head. Stretching his hand with it, Naruto rode the momentum of his foe until Gregor was introduced to the concrete of the pavilion base face first. A dull crunch made from flesh-kissing stone brought out a smile on the blue-eyed man's face. The assassin dug his fingers into Gregor's short hair and used that contact to drive the man's face back into the cruel cement. The blonde's tongue moved with the fluidity of a snake charmer when he decided to lean towards his fellow fighter. Does this position feel familiar to you? Naruto wasn't given anything more than a groan in response. He clicked his tongue against the back of his teeth and shook his head. That wasn't going to cut it. Naruto took his time scraping Gregor from the concrete that had been turned into an unwanted pillow of sorts for the larger man and his face. He didn't bother looking at the face under his hand. When he removed it, his only inclination was to smash Gregor back into the stone, which he did. Then he did it again and again and again until he heard the distinct crack that told Gregor broke his nose against the dark gray rock mixture. He clutched Gregor's skull, holding him in place as blood fell from his broken nose dripping down the front of his face. Naruto deliberately pushed Gregor into the wall, thus raking the man's facial features into the unforgiving wall of bumpy cement. I asked you a question. Trash copper was the taste Gregor was treated to as his blood rolled over his upper lip and into his mouth. That crimson fluid stained the teeth that he had grit in anger. Fuck you, he snapped back with a fierce snarl that the world was deprived of seeing. Wrong answer. His chiding statement was followed up with him spiking the mountain's face back into the cracking concrete over and over again until the busted-up man's frame lost the tension of resistance. Naruto, a version of the assassin's name modified to be used as a chant, wasn't something Naruto expected to hear. It stilled him for a time as he inadvertently soaked in the rain that was his name crashing upon the melee. Like thunder, it sounds like I'm not the only one that's calling for your death. There are plenty here and more spirits from the past that would be more than happy to see you meet the faceless god. Naruto's words may as well have been wildfire in the way that they motivated Gregor to action. His voice called on Gregor's ears, and in response his body tapped into its ungodly strength, which was made to kill anything that made him angry. Not before I kill you and all of them, Gregor bellowed hoarsely, refusing to be humiliated any further, planting his palms against the wall in front of him. The mountain burdened the entirety of his bulky physique with genetic might. He pushed with as much force as possible, which he then used to throw Naruto backward with a heavy howl of exertion. The blue eyes in the blonde's head widened, surprised with how much physical force that Gregor Clegane still had in reserve. Naruto did his best to recapture his balance, but his feet kept stumbling back when he recognized how fruitless of a task it was. He did the only thing he could, which was grabbing onto the Viper's Kiss before he fell onto his back. Thanks to Gregor needing to gather his sword, Naruto was allotted some time to gather himself anew. The amount of time wasn't anything substantial. The mountain was there over the top of him like a hungry lion, cleaving through the air with a heavy whistle that Gregor generated from the force of his swing alone. He followed through. A defense of some sort was a necessity, so he threw the spear in front of his chest. He positioned the spear long ways as the first line of defense between him and the sword. He witnessed how the wood snapped under Gregor's sword like a twig firsthand. Meanwhile, Gregor's bloodthirsty expression loomed in his peripheral vision. The unforeseen turn of events hushed the vigor with which the crowd expressed itself. Naruto looked at the broken weapon in his hands with a frown locked in place. Sorry about that, Oberyn. He quickly went back to the matter of defending himself from certain death, forgetting about the broken weapon. Regretfully for the bloodlust circulating in the Clegane's veins, the man on the ground had an ace up his sleeve. Chakra, the power of life, surged through his person in a guided motion directed by Naruto, and his intention to harness it. Chakra powered through his foot, and with its presence he sent a decisive kick out at Gregor, slamming the sole of his foot into Gregor's ankle. There was a moment where the armor Gregor wore and the structure of his ankle provided a few moments of resistance, but it wasn't fated to endure. That lone kick was enough to turn the entirety of the mountain's foot the wrong way before it broke. Like anyone or anything that used limbs to stand, Gregor needed both legs to maintain verticality. Without one of them there for support, he plummeted to the ground. Searing white-hot pain tore through his person. The pain was enough to prevent Gregor from catching himself on the way down. His scream wasn't anything coherent, which is why it paired so well with the desperate way he tried to clutch for his sideways foot, tossing Gregor over on his back. Naruto was more than ready to take advantage of his Gregor and his broken ankle. His whiskered cheeks went tight as he gave off a genuinely devastating smirk. It's time to make you sing. First, Naruto grabbed the spear half with the blade on it, and then he used that blade like a makeshift spike that was pierced through Gregor's left forearm, pinning the arm to the ground. At his side, Gregor, being so enthralled with the pain, didn't even realize what was happening to him. This lapse in awareness was what let Naruto take the broken wood and spike it into his other arm. When all was said and done, Gregor was fully pinned down and unable to defend himself. Enough of this, it's clear that he can't fight anymore. He's beaten. Tywin Lannister's attempt to stop the fight and save his reputation was disregarded. It was a known rule that only the competitor was permitted to take themselves out of the melee unless they were knocked Out this meant Naruto was free to do as he pleased with Gregor. The shadow of Gregor Clegane encroached upon many a nightmare during his short but bloody time on this earth. But even the notorious mountain looked small when he was flat on his back. He looked helpless now that he was impaled to the ground that was no doubt warmed by the blood Naruto forced from him. A more poetic scene couldn't be written, or so Naruto thought. As he stood over the one-eyed monster, wake up, there are questions that you need to answer here in front of everyone. The punctuation mark came in the form of an open-handed slap that rattled Gregor enough to snap him from his pain trance. Coming back around and seeing Naruto first made Gregor react in a snap. He tried to lunge at the blonde. He yearned to wrap his hands around the assassin's throat, but nothing happened. Gregor glanced at his arms to find the crude way he was trapped, and like a rabid beast he tried to lift himself. Try as he might, even the mighty mountain could only get an inch off the ground before his body failed him. Fucking hells. Now then, these lovely people need to hear what you have to say. First question, what's your name? The word carefree was the perfect way to describe the fashion in which Naruto treated the situation. He was hardly serious, or that's how he wanted to appear, and that added to the list of things that pissed Gregor off when it came to the blonde parts. Made the hole and the smile Gregor gave was just as hideous as the rest of his maimed face. Someone didn't need to be a master of reading bodies to see that he had very little experience when it came to making his mouth smile. Fuck you. Naruto shook his head, far from satisfied with the response Gregor opted to give him. Lifting his leg high, he stomped on the exposed side of Gregor's chest, painting a dirty boot mark on the man's skin while also driving the air out of his lungs. Wrong, don't worry, I'll let you try again. While Gregor was left to wheeze from Naruto's powerful kick, the blonde continued to casually grind the sole of his shoe into the chest cavity of the defiant beast. What were you doing in King's Landing during the Lannister sack of the city? The mountain's immobile body rocked along with a fit of laughter, licking the blood from his teeth as he laughed. The eerie sound swallowed the silence of the men and women who waited to see how this meeting of Maelstrom and Mountain played out. I was in the castle, killing every last loyalist I could find. The little sons of Horus soiled themselves when they saw me, and that was something that Naruto wasn't opposed to. Not in theory, at least. Most of the people who supported Ares' reign of madness were guilty to an extent past redemption, and their purge was welcome. Gregor acted to a total extent, and that was something that Naruto couldn't support, no matter the reason. He had slaughtered innocent men and women along the way simply because he could. There'd be justice for that. Did your slaughter spree include plans to murder Elia Martell, Rhaenys Martell, and Aegon Targaryen? His voice was oozing with spite as he listed only a few of the names that Gregor had wronged on that day. Naruto's words took that smile and turned into a deep scowl. Gregor was still livid that Naruto stopped him from having his way with Elia. The whiskered man had also deprived him of a nice reward when the damned blonde stopped him from putting an end to Rhaegar's family line. You think I'm scared of you? I ain't telling you shit. Sighing in mock despondency, the one in charge swept his hand through the wild blonde hair that sat on top of his head. I hate speaking in cliches because they make me sound like a character from the ballads, but it looks like we need to do this the hard way. I wanted to do this the hard way. Naruto stayed poised and ignored the curses spewed at him from Gregor in favor of pulling out a pair of kunai. After arming himself with his trusty weapons, he settled the point of his knee against the center of the mountain's chest to keep the titan stable. You can see what I'm holding in my hands. Well, I'm going to put them in your mouth, then I'm going to slice outward from the corners of your lips. Either I'm going to open your face by cutting till I hit your ears, or you're going to answer my questions. He proved to be faithful to his word when he promptly shoved his incisive tools in Gregor's mouth. The tender flesh inside of Gregor's mouth was very vulnerable to the cold steel, and fairly quickly he began to thrash from the pain of Naruto carving open his mouth. The small children got pulled away from the blatant torture session, but for the most part the people who remained were eager, if not happy, to see a knight suffer as they suffered for so long. Nobility and knights were the sources of the problems in Westeros. In the eyes of many, the accuracy of such claims could be debated, but the answer didn't change the fact that seeing a knight being treated like dirt was a cathartic experience for the common people. Unbothered by the blood that stained his hands, Naruto proceeded to apply just enough pressure to push his knives forward at a creeping pace. He could have opened Gregor up so much faster, but going slow was a guaranteed way to extend the pain. That was forcing Gregor to scream through the slight mufflers that were Naruto's hands. Why did you go to Lady Elia's bedroom? Answer the question. It was clear that he was more focused on antagonizing Naruto than preserving himself, because he did something defiant to a stupid degree. He tried to get a curse word or two out, but instead of words, all he managed to do was move his tongue in a way that got it cut. The pain shut his eyes. Naruto pulled his kunai out further, and soon blood pooled in the back of Gregor's mouth while he attempted to fight Through the pain it was blood that he tried to gurgle out desperately to avoid choking on his biles. It wasn't done in an offer of pity, yet Gregor was given a chance to speak all the same. When Naruto removed one of his dripping blades, "I was going to kill her, brats, you fucker," he blubbered through a large gasp filled with blood. Naruto nodded his head and stopped his kunai from going any further into the bleeding red skin on the man's torn up face. He had already stretched Gregor's mouth an additional 3 inches in both directions, and he was ready to go all the way should Gregor fail to cooperate with him. "You killed Aegon?" "Yes." Any idea of spitting at Naruto and his questions were removed painfully when Naruto jostled the kunai back into the hitch carved out from what used to be part of his cheek. "You're damn right I did." The little shit wouldn't stop crying, so I popped his head. I would have choked the life out of the girl too, if there was a surge of negative emotions in the blonde. Upon hearing Gregor make his admission the plan to harm the girl he affectionately knew as Ray left Naruto with a cold feeling in his heart, he responded to that by slamming his head down on the beaten man's broken nose. As if Gregor didn't have enough breaks in his nose, Naruto added another one, which forced a jet of blood to splatter the lower half of the dishonorable knight's face. "What about Lady Elliot?" The chilly inflection of Naruto's voice resonated perfectly with the icy vibe in his eyes. "Motherfucking son of a whore." The nasal quality in Gregor's voice only worsened as his nose was demolished yet again. At this point it was getting hard for him to breathe. Perhaps that is why he made the mistake of thinking and speaking with his other head, "That Dornish whore, I was going to kill her too, but not until I fucked her. I bet her cunt is nice and tight too." The control he had over himself nearly slipped, which is why Naruto needed to physically restrain his chakra lest it lashed out like lightning in a storm. He may have controlled his hidden power, but his hands had no such discipline. His fingers curled roughly around the kunai handles, and in a sudden motion he lashed out, cutting into Gregor's mouth so deeply that Naruto felt his kunai struggling against the spots where the 2 parts of Gregor's jaw connected. His friend was a beautiful woman who survived plenty, and to have Elia belittled right in front of his face like that invoked a fury within him that Naruto had forgotten existed. Naruto was going to make sure that Gregor felt some of her pain before he lost his life. Pain no longer was a strong enough term to describe what Gregor was feeling as he battered himself along the spikes that skewered his arms. This was more like pure agony that was being injected into him, one violent move at a time, as blood was flowing from his open mouth like a faulty faucet soaking steel, and torn of slices of glowing red flesh alike feasting on Gregor's miserable state with no morsel of repentance. The pointed tips of Naruto's canine teeth peeked out to Fang his smirk. "You've confessed to murder. You've also confessed to attempted rape and murder of a lady in front of the entire realm. Next question, why did you do it?" Covered in his blood for once, Gregor attempted to glare at his nemesis, but the most he could produce was a weak leer that failed to shatter the hazy film that glazed his single eye. "Because the strong do what they want to the weak. Fine, if you want to play games then you'll bleed doing it." Desolation colored the words that came from the massive man's mouth. His next words were an attempt to try and make the pain stop. Nothing more. He wouldn't beg like a craven bitch, but he would answer the question if it meant the pain was taken away. "I did it because I was told to do it." "Who told you to rape and kill Elia Martell?" It was a question Naruto knew the answer to. Anyone who possessed a modicum of political knowledge was aware of who issued the order. What the vengeful killer wanted was for the people to hear an admission of guilt. There was a flicker of hesitation on Gregor's part as he grappled between staying loyal to Tywin Lannister or the survival of himself. His smashed up nose, his carved out lips, and the drying blood that clotted on his skin was finally enough to make him see reason. It was Tywin Lannister. They took the first step, getting the admission. Now was the time to connect Elia with the common folk through their mutual pain. "Who allowed you to murder and plunder ever since you were wrongly given the mantle of knighthood?" Gregor grit his teeth as he struggled from one side to the other, going for a final stand, a final attempt to break free from his capture. Thick veins bulged along his temple and neck as he fought to rip himself out of the spikes that were buried in the ground. It was for naught in the end. The only thing he managed to do was increase the rate at which he lost his blood. Getting dizzy after his tirade, he managed one last word before his eye closed. "Tywin." Finally Naruto let himself be taken with a smile as his ears caught the open, if not slightly derisive laughter that came from where Oberyn was seated. This was the stage Naruto envisioned back when he saved Elia, and it was time to use it. Throwing his blood-soaked hands forward, he gestured to the glaring Tywin Lannister with both of his knives. "There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Gregor Clegane has admitted to being a monster." He admitted that the one ordering him around was none other than the esteemed Warden of the West, Tywin Lannister. "Will your gold pay for all the families you have ruined, Tywin? Can you buy off all the blood you have ordered to be spilled so that you can live on your mountain of luster?" His scathing truths stood alone for only a moment before they were piled on by the singular unanimous hiss of anger originating from the crowd of downtrodden that were finally given proof that their so-called betters were liars and cheats. Their Range of comments spanned from colorful insults to Tywin fighting Naruto or being sent to the wall. It kept up like this until the people in the crowd decided to get more active with their displeasure stacking on each other. They turned into one thriving conglomerate of disdain that started to shake the fences. Barriers meant to exist for safety reasons began rippling to and fro like a bedsheet whipping around in the wind. The crowd's hostility caused many in the pavilion to stand with their respective guards, forming a wall between the nobility and the enraged masses. The fences looked ready to collapse at any given moment. Naruto remained planted in the metaphorical storm surge. Although he was closest to the maw of the mob, he turned his back to the nobles and faced the angry mass of people trying to claw their way through the barrier. People of King's Landing, hear my voice. The chakra infused into his words helped Naruto overpower everything in the vicinity. His powerful hail for silence earned him the attention of the world. Naruto took it and thumped his bloody fist against his heart. He nodded towards his captivated audience, and then he addressed them. Give me your anger, give me your pain, give me your strength, and I will bring the justice you deserve. Allow me to be the vessel, and I will show this so-called lord the power of your will. Already on the precipice of a riot, the people rallied behind Naruto like a folk hero. Or was he a cult leader in place of trying to crash the melee? They took their energy and used it to scream his name. Their voices were louder than when they cheered for Barristan, and even more vocal than their first attempt to chant his name, the name of a man who openly defied the system of their repression. Throwing his weapons into the grass on either side of him, the people's hero lifted the greatsword off the ground with a single hand. He marched stiffly to where the unconscious mountain laid as an afterthought in the groundswell of public outrage. Lifting the sword high, Naruto flipped his grip and drove the sword straight down into the mountain's chest. He chose not to aim for the bare chest, and it didn't matter because the sword tore through the armor and sheathed itself into the body beneath with a wet squelch. On behalf of every person you have wronged, I sentence you to an eternity of torment and death. How long? Was everyone silent after that? Was it moments? Was it minutes? Get Gregor out of there and get him to the Grand Maester. Then to the ears of the men locked to him, the orders of Tywin Lannister were swallowed by the applause, approval, and adulation that rained down on Naruto's stern shoulders. A small group of 4 golden lions stormed down to the broken body of the mountain. Their progress was obvious, but Naruto stood in place unbent by their superior number. He all but dared the henchmen to do something to him. To Naruto's disappointment, they did nothing more than free Gregor from the ground, which allowed them to drag his carcass away. You're wasting your time. That monster is dead. The blonde would have continued to talk down them if not for a sudden halt that was created by a sharp, unexpected pain riding up from his gut. A tremble raced through him via the pain that also made his head drop mechanically. He found a slightly longer than normal dagger sticking out from just beside his abdomen. Black leather armor was split along with Naruto's orange shirt, and this showed the red-tinted weapon that was thrust through his body. Naruto Elia, crying out his name in a panic, was the only thing that managed to reach his ears through the barrier of blurriness in his ringing ears. He compared the sensation to being underwater. The only thing it didn't account for was the mouthful of blood and the blade in his belly spitting up a glob of thick blood and tainted spit. He tried to move one of his hands to the weapon inside of him but stopped when he felt someone whispering right into his ear, "You're a damned fool for letting your guard down in the middle of a battlefield. I'll be paid handsomely for your mistake, so thank you for that." The smugness and the heated breath on his ear made Naruto's tanned skin crawl in apprehension. That's right, Marin Tran. He forgot that the cowardly cunt was lurking about, and boy did he pay for that lapse in judgment. Naruto wasn't sure if he should laugh or cough at what happened, so he settled for doing the one thing he could manage, a bloody cough. "You'd strike me when the fight was interrupted by Lannister men. An honorable knight my ass." Naruto's speech was interrupted by several coughs, though he got his message out, grinning sharply at the results of his plan in action. Marin forced his weapon in further to Naruto's stomach, which milked out a deep groan of pain. "You know where honor is in being 15,000 dragons richer than I was earlier today." A heaving Naruto spoke with a shell of the strength he had earlier while his head dropped down further until his face was hidden from the awkward angle. "You're making a mistake," he whispered to Trant over his panting exhales that only spit more blood out over his lower lip. "Spare me the tough guy talk and just die." Naruto powered a laugh through the taste of his blood. He showed a crimson smile that shuddered itself over the lower portion of his hidden expression. "I tried to warn you." Trant, like most of the fearful fans of Naruto, expected the blonde to crumble in a bath of his blood, but that wasn't quite what played out. Rather than succumbing to a cold death on the end of a dagger, the assassin thrust his elbow backward. The point of his elbow struck Trent in the neck right beneath his Adam's apple. Marin stumbled back, clutching at his throat as he began to gag on nothing but the air struggling to pass down his trachea. Naruto turned without lagging in stride once, which made it look like he didn't have a blade sticking out of him. He followed a struggling Trent and hoisted him off his feet by grabbing the man by his neck. What the why aren't you? When he looked into what was hidden from the others, Marin's litany of questions were crushed. It was red eyes glaring back at him, not blue. This unexpected change and the fact that Naruto survived a sword through the stomach spare a fearful comparison within an already weak-willed man demon. No one heard Marin make his claim. Round pupils were now slanted in the cover of Naruto's red irises, which flashed thoughtfully at Marin. Trance claim of demon as Naruto blinked pensively. Humi, it's possible, but that means you're in a lot of trouble. I'm going to enjoy hurting you. Vivid reminders of what Naruto did to Gregor flashed through Marin's thoughts, and those thoughts brought about panic. He clawed at that hand Naruto had wrapped around his throat. I surrender. Marin, trying to shout, triggered a tighter grip that only inspired more fear in the visibly quaking man. I said I surrender you when he clicked his teeth and shut his eyes before openly spitting on Marin. Naruto sent the coward soaring back with a clean punch to the face that knocked out the craven and short order winner of the melee. Naruto, oh that's right, I'm in the middle of something here. Smirking wryly, he went to bow to the crowd. His gesture reminded him of the weapon still buried inside of him and how it was making tough for him to bow. Without even blinking, he pulled out the weapon with a hissed grunt that came out only after he tossed it away. That's going to suck to heal later. Back to a semblance of normal, he bowed to the people of King's Landing. Naruto showed humility to the people. He defied death in front of thousands, and he shouldered their cause. All of these things would build the foundation of his legend, but that was the future. Right now he was being hailed as a king by the people of King's Landing. Choosing to bow irritated the place he was stabbed, but Naruto was glad he did it. The pain meant he was alive. Right? He put a hand over his injury and turned around. That's when he saw Robert and John Aaron walking his direction, showing how unpredictable he could be. Naruto ignored the two powerful men and looked right at Elia. He saw the tears flowing down her cheeks and was conflicted. She could be happy, but she could also be sad. I hope she isn't crying for me. The king took a moment to size up the assassin, unaware that Naruto wasn't even paying attention to him. In the end he broke his focus with a nod of his head. After the show you've put on, I think that all of my future tourneys will fall short to this one. Under most circumstances Naruto would have had a nice laugh from the tongue-in-cheek tone that was used, but then he remembered what Robert did when presented with Aegon's dead body, and that crushed any positive feelings inside of the blonde. Maybe that's for the best. Not many can handle chaos like this consistently. Robert didn't bother to hide how he snorted at what Naruto had to say. That's rich coming out of the mouth of the man who created all the chaos. Is that why you're here, to cut off the head of the chaos? Injured he may be, but even stabbed Naruto would make whoever the king chose work to kill him. Expecting anything less would prove to be a costly mistake on Robert's part. Any further entertaining of that idea was stopped when Robert waved away the speculation. Some of my advisors think that is my wisest option. Some say it was unbecoming of the king to be so bold, but the truth was that Robert would always be this frank, so tossing his advisors under the carriage wasn't that out of character for him. Is that so? Naruto earned himself a mildly impressed glance from Robert, who thought that Naruto was sure to cower in the face of his station as king. Yes, but I decided against it. If I had you killed, then the people would riot throughout the city and I'd lose my throne. Sometimes it's better to not listen to the advice of men beneath you. That and Ned would never talk to me again if he heard I raised my hand against the man who killed the mountain. Before he even asked his question, Naruto was wearing a curiously cocked eyebrow as a badge of confusion. Ned, he couldn't recall meeting a man named that or even hearing the name during his admittedly short stay in the landing. Alright, Eddard Stark goes by the name Ned. He's a northerner who is about as lively as a bag of bodies. Ned was right pissed when we rewarded Gregor. Maybe I can use this to convince him to come out of Winterfell. The king let his string of consciousness flow freely, unaware of how his words played with Naruto, who was much closer to the Martells than he knew. The whiskered cheeks of the melee winner took a stiff drop at Robert's choice of a joke, finding it to be done in poor taste. If that's all, I'd like to get cleaned up. His hasty attempt to brush past Robert was brought to a swift end when Robert put his hand on top of Naruto's shoulder. The wholly uninvited contact locked Naruto's shoulders and nearly provoked the dangers of touching a trained assassin without permission. There are two things we need to talk about. Only barely refraining from letting out a sigh, the tired victor took a step back from the king, breaking contact. His blue eyes drilled into the man in ownership of the Iron Throne with apathy. What is it then? What Robert did first was to ignore the disrespectful way that he was addressed. He couldn't blame a warrior from biting when the adrenaline was still flowing strong. Your reward of 15,000 dragons will be sent to your lodging later tonight. Naruto nodded his head silently. He was so focused on dealing with the mountain that he nearly forgot about the prize money. And second, Gregor was meant to compete in the joust tomorrow, but now that won't be happening. So how about you take his place and go for back-to-back wins? What do you say, huh, champ?